147. At the peak of the cliff where the celestial emperor was commanding the flood dragon, there were 3 people standing there. There was also the lady who was skilled in swordsmanship. No one knew where she was, only her voice could be heard but not her face. Among them, Kui Ming Huang from the Lakeview Academy, who had the lowest cultivation, was the most troubled. In other places, he, the great gentleman, should be a first-class immortal. He would be respected as a distinguished guest. Unfortunately, in this place tonight, Kui Ming Huang was reduced to the most inconspicuous ant. He might even be worse than an ant. This terrible feeling made Kui Ming Huang, who was used to being superior, feel depressed. He had no choice but to recite the Confucian classics silently and suppress his distracting thoughts. He glanced at the old man who returned to the human world from the Milky Way on a boat. The old man was now disguised as the former assistant minister of the Huangting country, but in reality, he was an old flood dragon who was frighteningly old. The old man was much calmer than Kui Ming Huang. He twirled his beard and looked at the sword aura cage with great interest. He muttered to himself and clicked his tongue in wonder. Kui Ming Huang was ordered by the imperial tutor to the south to discuss secret matters with the hibernating flood dragon. Imperial tutor Dali wanted this old man who was temporarily the former assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue of the Huangting country to be the first hill master of the new academy built in the cloud-splitting mountain. Kui Ming Huang would still be the deputy hill master as previously agreed. Together with a reputable Dali, the 3 of them would be in charge of the new academy that filled the vacancy of the Cliff Academy. It was believed that with Emperor Dali's ambition and boldness, the unnamed new academy in the cloud-splitting mountain would be bigger and more scholarly than Qi Jingquan's Cliff Academy. As for the position of the new academy's hill master that was originally promised to the Lakeview Academy, it was said that Emperor Dali had privately compensated for it. Before Kui Ming Huang received the secret letter from the imperial tutor, Kui Dong, he had no idea that there was such a huge flood dragon hidden in a small pond in the small Huangting country. Flood dragons were blessed with a tough body and were born with the ability to master water techniques. Even if it was at Realm 10, its combat strength would not lose out to a Realm 11 Qi refinement warrior. State Preceptor Kui Shi's secret letter revealed that ever since the dragon-slaying battle that shocked the heavens and earth, the ancient Shu country, which was famous for its many flood dragons, had blood flowing through the mountains and rivers for thousands of miles. Broken flood dragon limbs and bones were everywhere. It was a tragic sight. Then, in the long river of time, this extremely old flood dragon hid very well. It had been constantly changing its appearance. It had been a general, a minister, a peddler, a soldier, and a hero. It could be said that it had experienced the vicissitudes of life. The old flood dragon was not interested in reproduction and had very few children. In the surrounding mountains and rivers of the Huangting country, there was only 1 daughter and 2 sons. Among them, the youngest son was the Hansha River god of the Great Water Mansion, while the eldest daughter was the founder of the Chululu Inn, Liu Jiahui's Xiang Mansion. However, her true identity had been kept a secret to the outside world. Even among the first generation of direct disciples of her Xiang Mansion, there were only a few people who knew about this. Now, with the passing of those old ancestors of the Xiang Mansion, the truth had long been lost. As for the eldest son of the old flood dragon, his temperament was pure and kind, unlike the other flood dragons. Since young, he liked to wander around the world. Now, there was no news of him. It was hard to say whether he was still in the Aquarius continent. The poor old scholar with a bag on his back had just arrived at the peak of the mountain from the seaside using the Daoist's shrinking earth technique. He never thought that he would be stopped by someone. The key point was that the trouble was not small. This made the old scholar frown even more. Because of the soaring sword Qi wall that blocked the Qi of heaven and earth, even the old man was temporarily unable to sense the outside world. The old scholar rubbed his chin. Oh my God, the aunties outside are all so powerful now. The old man sighed. He raised his arm and knocked on the void with his finger. He said softly, "Stop." The heaven and earth instantly became silent. There was no longer the sound of the surging river or the slight shattering sound of the mountain wind hitting the sword wall. Within this 10 miles of mountains and rivers, time no longer flowed. The Confucian saint's aura was vast and mighty. Kui Minghuang's fear turned into ecstasy. He began to recite the teachings of the saint loudly in his heart to increase his noble spirit. For a Confucian gentleman who aspired to become a saint, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. At this moment, even the experienced and knowledgeable old flood dragon was shocked. He subconsciously took a few steps back and distanced himself from the unprepossessing old scholar. Even if this distance was of no use, old flood dragon still did it to show a humble attitude. In the ancient times, before the dragon slaying, when the old flood dragon was still young, he heard from his elders that there was a Confucian saint who was only second to the great sage in the Confucian temple. He had once set an unwritten rule with the dragon kings of the 4 directions. The flood dragons on the land had to avoid the sages and hide when they met the saints. Once, there was a huge flood dragon that was only second to the dragon kings of the 4 directions. He used the fact that he was in a huge lake and deliberately raised the waves to the sky in front of the saints who were traveling on the shore. He deliberately raised the waves to the sky higher than the cities and farmlands on the shore to intimidate the people on the shore. He used this to provoke the saints. This action meant that he didn't go ashore and didn't break the rule. What could the Confucian saint do to him? At that time, the young flood dragon was just feeling satisfied with this action. However, he heard from his elders what happened next. The Confucian saint stretched out a finger and said something similar to what the old scholar said tonight. He used his great power to stop the storm and fixed the true dragon in the air, causing the lake water to flow backward for dozens of miles. Therefore, the true dragon went ashore without permission and didn't hide when it met the saints. Therefore, the saints skinned it and pulled out its tendons before suppressing it under a lake rock that was as big as a mountain at the bottom of the lake. As a punishment, it couldn't appear in the world for 1,000 years. At that time, the elders had warned the younger generation that the tempers of the scholarly sages, especially those who had altars and statues in the Confucian temples, were not very good. Otherwise, why would there be such a saying as "Daoist appearance is peaceful"? The old flood dragon was puzzled and asked, "Isn't the Confucian saint's action against the rules?" The elders angrily replied, "Idiot, have you forgotten who set the rules?" At this moment, the old flood dragon at the top of the cliff seemed to have remembered something from the past and was a little sad. He murmured, "The flood dragon and the others enforce justice on behalf of the heavens. They are noble beyond words and can be regarded as a vassal town that only listens to orders. In the end, they are almost extinct. The saints can't be blamed for this. It's all because of their ambition." The old scholar was surprised and turned to look at the old flood dragon who looked like a scholar in his 70s. He nodded with a smile and said, "It's good to be able to change one's mistakes. No wonder when I passed by this place last time, I still felt that something was missing even though I saw the beautiful scenery. It's because of you. Well, there's also a gentleman. A gentleman, Xiao Qi back then. Well, it's fate that we met. It's a pity that I can't take care of you for now. Go." The old scholar muttered to himself and then gently swiped his finger outwards. The old flood dragon and Kui Minghuang were forcefully moved away from the top of the cliff. The man and the flood dragon landed on the surface of the river in the distance. They opened their palms and looked down. Then, almost at the same time, they clenched their palms and hid the golden characters in their palms. Of course, they didn't want to reveal it to the public. The old scholar in the sword formation looked around and laughed, "Hiding and hiding, you can't be considered a hero." The old scholar quickly realized that his words didn't make sense. He stammered and didn't know how to get himself out of this situation. On the other side of the cliff near the water, a tall woman in white appeared. She was holding a big lotus leaf in her hand which could be regarded as a lotus umbrella. However, the lotus leaf and the lotus handle were snow white, complementing her white clothes and white shoes. It was spotless. After the old scholar saw the lotus leaf, he frowned and quickly began to calculate in his heart. In the end, his expression became gloomy and he sighed. He looked up at the sky and didn't look away for a long time. He muttered, "Where was the last time I went?" Thinking back to that young man who was full of vigor, he kept saying that a gentleman would rather break than bend and destroy jade and common stone together. In the end, it's been hard on you. The old scholar looked at the tall woman in white and said, "If Chen Pinggan killed young man Kui Dong, it wouldn't be a good thing. She smiled and said, I see. But I can't do anything about it. If you have the ability, you can talk about it after you leave the sword formation. It's useless to reason with me. You can talk to my little Ping'an. It might be useful. She paused and sneered, but the premise is that you have to walk out first. You were able to send those 2 guys out smoothly because I was too lazy to stop you. The old scholar said helplessly, when I was alive, I wasn't good at fighting, and now I'm even worse at it. Why do you have to force me to do something I don't want to do? Besides, Chen Ping'an and the young man Kui Shi, one is now my half-disciple, and the other half my grand-disciple. Who do you think I should help? Although I'm going there this time to help Kui Shi survive, in the end, isn't it for Chen Ping'an's sake? The woman in white nodded and said, it's very reasonable. Then she shook her head and said, but I didn't come here to reason with people. The old scholar became more and more helpless. For the sake of your little Ping'an, can't you make an exception for me? I'm just a teacher. If you don't listen to reason, I won't be able to use my skills. And you're one of the best fighters in the world, one of the few swords. It's not entirely correct to call you a sword. Forget it, forget it. Let's not argue about this title. Anyway, it's very unfair to me. The tall woman held a strange umbrella and said with an indifferent expression, break the formation. The old man had no choice but to ask carefully, do you know who I am? The woman in white smiled and said, I know. You're the sage of literature. The old man was stunned. He thought to himself, she knows my background, but she still doesn't give me face. This is a bit too much. The sage of rites and the sage of literature were the sage of literature and the sage of literature. They were respectively the hierarch of Confucianism. This old man was the sage of literature revered by all Confucian students in the world. He sat at the highest and most central position in the Confucian temple. Next were the statues of the second hierarch of Confucianism, the sage of rites, and the sage of literature, the sage of literature. The former received the most praise and commendation from the sage of literature. He was regarded as a moral role model and a teacher of etiquette. He established the most rigorous and complicated set of rules in Confucianism. The sage of literature was widely acknowledged to be the most knowledgeable. He was the closest to the sage of literature. Moreover, he opened a new path for Confucianism and made it the only imperial school in the world. The sage of literature was the 4th highest position in the Confucian temple, the sage of literature. Of course, this was a long time ago. This position had been vacant for a long time. Because the statue was lowered time and time again, it couldn't stay in the Confucian temple any longer and was moved out. As the 4th sage of literature, he was kicked out of the Confucian orthodoxy. That wasn't all, but in the end, he couldn't even keep his statue. A group of stubborn and extreme Confucian students smashed the statue, which was so miserable that it had to live under someone else's roof, into pieces. Only then did they leave. The old scholar reached behind him and patted his bag. The bag disappeared. The old scholar asked patiently, why don't we talk nicely? Can't we not fight? The woman thought for a while and nodded, then I'll be polite. The old scholar nodded happily and said with a smile, that would be best. In an instant, the sword energy of the sword formation became even more dense and majestic. The unparalleled sword aura seemed to be able to cut through the Tao of heaven and earth. It was said that there were many sword immortals in the ancient times. They dared not lower their heads to the ancestors of the 3 sects. They wantonly roamed the world with their sword techniques and end-realm sword Tao. They were invincible sword spirits. The woman's lips twitched. Sage of literature, please break the formation. Isn't that a little too courteous? 148. The old scholar stomped his feet and said angrily, only villains and women are difficult to deal with. The ancients didn't lie to me. The tall woman twisted the snow-white lotus leaf that she had picked from somewhere. She was full of killing intent. Although she was still smiling, she looked cold. You can't beat me, so you scold me? Are you looking for a beating? The circular sword formation that was originally spread out over a radius of 10 miles was instantly retracted, only surrounding the riverside and the cliff. At the same time, the sword chi became even sharper and more astonishing. The sword chi condensed into a sword formation wall, as well as the invisible great Tao of nothingness that flowed between heaven and earth. The old scholar shrank his neck and suddenly had an idea. He immediately became confident and asked loudly, "We can fight, but can we change the way we fight?" "Don't worry. My request can also bring Chen Pingan along. I guarantee that it's reasonable and it's what you want." The tall woman was silent. Suddenly, she saw that the old man was trying to signal her with his eyes. She hesitated for a moment and nodded. "Okay." On the mouth of the well in the inn, the young man put 2 fingers together like a sword and pointed to the bottom of the well. The rainbow light created by the first wisp of sword chi gradually faded away in the old well. It was no longer so dazzling that people could not look at it directly. With the help of the light, Chen Pingan could vaguely see that the wisp of sword chi, which was said to be extremely small, had condensed into substance after leaving the Chi Fu acupoint. Like a rainstorm, it crazily smashed onto a piece of ground. And this piece of ground that was hit by the rainstorm was like the surface of a mirror. Of course, Chen Pingan didn't know that it was called the Thunder Department's seal mirror. It had an extraordinary origin and a deep history. After the death of a celestial emperor in ancient times, the gods of the Thunder Department took advantage of the situation and divided the thunder power of the ancestor of all laws. They each controlled a part of the thunder power. After that, they were in an even worse situation. Except for the god of the Thunder Department who was in charge of praying for spring, the other gods had long been reduced to the existence of mountains, rivers, and rivers. They were either bound by the edict of the saints of the 3 religions and were not allowed to step out of the thunder pool. They were often called by military forces like Wind Snow Temple and Junwu Mountain, or some Taoist sects with the Thunder Talisman and the art of inviting gods. The owner of this Thunder Department seal mirror used to be one of the gods of the Thunder Department. Although it had suffered many disasters, from the surface of the mirror to the inside, it had long been broken and the brilliance of thunder and lightning inside was almost exhausted. It was definitely not something that a cultivator of the middle 5 states could break. The body of the young man in white in the ancient well had been suppressed for more than 10 feet, but he still used his hands and shoulders to resist the bottom of the mirror. The surface of the mirror was constantly shaking and breaking under the impact of the sword chi. However, it was quickly repaired by the remaining thunder and lightning in the mirror to its original appearance. The attack of the sword chi was like the attack of an iron horse, while the defense of the mirror was like the defense of an infantryman. The 2 sides wore each other down, and it depended on whose momentum was exhausted first. The young man Kui Dong clenched his teeth. His handsome face was covered with blood, blurring his handsome face. At this time, he didn't have any extra strength to speak harshly. He could only say in his heart, "After I get through this storm of sword chi, I will return it 100 times more. I can definitely do it. The momentum of the sword rain is declining. I just need to hold on for a little longer. Chen Pingan, just you wait." Although the spirit of the young man in the well didn't diminish, his appearance of being bathed in blood was really a little desolate. Even in the bleak years when he betrayed his master and traveled all the way, leaving the central divine continent and going to the big continent in the south, he finally chose to settle down in the eastern treasured bottle continent, which had the smallest territory. The head disciple of the sage of literature in the past, Kui Dong, had traveled tens of millions of miles. Along the way, he was free and unfettered. Demons, ghosts, and monsters, who could make him so miserable? One had to know that before becoming the imperial tutor of Dali, Kui Dong, the wandering scholar, had a catchphrase that was difficult to describe. Just because he liked to kill demons, he would say, turned into ashes in the snap of a finger, "You are really worse than an ant." The young man carrying the mirror, Kui Dong's body continued to fall, but the extent of his fall gradually became smaller. The mirror could still hold on, but outside the mirror, there was sword chi constantly flowing down. Being continuously soaked by the sword chi, the young man's body was already on the verge of collapse. He could only think of something and slide out a life-saving talisman from his sleeve. He had kept it for many years, and now that he had to use it, his heart ached so much that his face was somewhat sinister. The golden talisman first stuck to the white sleeve, and then instantly melted. Soon, the surface of Kui Dong's white robe was covered with golden talisman characters. If one listened carefully, there was actually the sound of Buddhist Sanskrit rising in spirals. The white robe flowed like water ripples, setting off the young man Kui Dong's solemn appearance. This talisman was extremely special. If gold powder and cinnabar were the main materials for drawing talismans, then there were other materials that could only be encountered but not sought. Once made into a talisman, the various effects of the talisman would be indescribably wonderful. For example, Kui Dong's talisman was made from the golden blood of a Western Buddhist kingdom golden arhat as the main material for drawing talismans. Moreover, this senior monk who had attained the Tao had almost become a bodhisattva, so his blood appeared golden. When poured into the gold powder and written sutras on the talisman, it could turn into a Vajra amulet with boundless dharma. It could even withstand a full blow from a sword immortal of the land. How could the young man Kui Dong not feel distressed? After taking out this invaluable life-saving talisman, the young man calculated in his mind and easily calculated that the sword chi would only break the mirror at most, but the mirror itself would not be damaged. In the future, as long as he went to the sea of clouds with lightning and thunder every night of a thunderstorm and guided the thunder and lightning into the mirror, this mirror of the thunder department would be restored to its original state in a few years. In this way, Kuisha's heart calmed down, and he tilted his arm slightly to wipe off the blood on his face. This is a great humiliation, and it almost destroyed the foundation of this body of mine. Kui Dong closed his eyes and began to silently accumulate power. He only needed to wait for a critical moment before the sword chi completely dissipated, and that would be the time for him to kill his way to the mouth of the well. Of course, he would not wait for the sword chi to completely dissipate. If he waited until the sword chi completely disappeared, once Chen Pingan above found that he was not dead, the bumpkin of Clay Bottle Alley might really have a follow-up sinister and dangerous move. After all, at this time, whether it was his cultivation or his body, he could not withstand any accidental speculation. The road was really muddy and rugged and difficult to walk on. The young man's heart was full of hatred. The trip to the small town was what the imperial tutor Kui Dong thought was the final battle. Because it involved the opportunity to prove Tao, he did not hesitate to separate half of his soul and live in another body, leaving the capital of Dali with the image of a young man. He originally thought that even if he could not break the literary fate of Mr. Wen Sheng and his junior brother Qi Jingchun, he could still use the young man from Clay Bottle Alley as the object of visualization. He could use the young man from Clay Bottle Alley to sharpen his mind and make up for the most lacking state of mind. This would help him break through the 10th realm in one go, and hopefully return to the peak of the 12th realm. He could even use Dali to spread his knowledge. As long as his achievements and knowledge could spread across half of the continent, he could make further progress. If all the Confucian students in the continent were the disciples of Kui Dong, the benefits would be unimaginable. At that time, no matter how he calculated, Kui Dong could be in an invincible position. The only difference was the size of the profit. However, he never thought that the direct disciple that Qi Jingchun really chose was not Zhao Yarrow who gave him the Chun seal, not Song Jisin who gave him the remaining books, not even Lin Shuyi who was a young scholar. It was the little girl named Li Baoping. She was a woman. How could a woman inherit the literary pulse? A female teacher, a female teacher? Wasn't she afraid of becoming the laughingstock of the world? Wasn't she afraid of being regarded as the #1 heresy by the elders in the Confucian Academy? What was even more unexpected was that Qi Jingchun took in a disciple on behalf of his teacher and gave the relics of the literary sage, Kui Dong and Qi Jingchun, to the young man Chen Pingan. In this way, not only did the literary pulse not break, but it was passed down to Li Baoping's generation. Moreover, Kui Dong, who had betrayed his teacher and betrayed his teacher, was once again tied to the literary sage because of Chen Pingan. This caused Kui Shi, who mistakenly thought that victory was in his grasp, to have his state of mind completely shattered in an instant. Coupled with the invisible guidance of literary fate, his cultivation level fell to the 5th realm. If it weren't for the alliance he made with Old Man Yang later and learned a long-lost secret technique of the divine path, which mended a flaw in a secret technique that Kui Shi himself had studied, allowing him to quickly nourish his soul like a withered tree in spring, and his cultivation level began to rise. However, this secret technique had a fatal flaw. The accumulated cultivation was an illusion. After using it once, it would be beaten back to its original state. Unless one broke through the 10 realms in one go and entered the upper 5 realms, one could turn the false into the real and the real into the false. The false and the real would be mixed up, and it would be a different world. When he arrived at the Autumn Read Inn, the young man Quidong's illusion realm was actually close to the 9th realm again. This was why he had the opportunity to use the God-inviting method of the military school to invite the golden body of the scholarly sage. The realm was fake, but the method was real. That was why the Hansha River god was so scared that his guts were about to burst. Otherwise, with the experience and shrewdness of the green-robed man who commanded the northern water transport for hundreds of years, how could he be tamed by Quisha like a little catfish in a stream without suffering enough? At the bottom of the well. The rainstorm of sword energy that fell from the well was still aggressive. The sword light was splashed everywhere by the mirror. The young man in white was almost at the bottom of the well. The well water and the underground water in the city that was connected to the river had long been evaporated by the sword energy. The young man Quidong began to count down in his heart. He did not want to kill Chen Pinggan. It was true, at least for the time being. Because Quidong was more like a tug-of-war, hoping to pull the young man onto his own great Tao. At least in the short term, not only would Quidong not harm Chen Pinggan, but he would also do his best to help Chen Pinggan increase his cultivation. At most, he would quietly change Chen Pinggan's temperament and influence him imperceptibly. In the end, he would become a comrade of Quidong. If Chen Pinggan was lucky and had the hope of inheriting Quidong's mantle in the future, Quidong would not refuse. But Quidong really wanted to kill Li Baoping. Because once this little girl grew up, and Quidong was still involved with Chen Pinggan, the more Li Baoping was cursed and ostracized, Quidong's great Tao cultivation would more or less be affected. For Quidong, who pursued perfection, this was absolutely unacceptable. The young man Quidong felt that this was an undeserved disaster. Even if I was a bad guy with evil intentions, if I wanted to kill you, Chen Pinggan, why would I pretend to be a coward all the way? I was clearly harmless to you. Why would you, Chen Pinggan, kill me just because of a little guess? What right do you have to kill them without hesitation just because you think that I'm harboring evil intentions towards the 3 children? Then what kind of gentleman are you? Qi Jingchun had always admired gentlemen. Why would you, who was valued by Qi Jingchun, be so unreasonable? Why would the old man want me to learn how to be a gentleman from you? I, Quidong, was once the first disciple of the sage of literature, and I once imparted knowledge to Qi Jingchun. In terms of status in the Confucian orthodoxy, I, Quidong, am much higher than a virtuous gentleman. Yet you, Chen Pinggan, do things based on your heart. The old man's vision is really as bad as always. Qi Jingchun helped you choose. Isn't that the same as helping you choose a second Quidong? The young man Quidong, whose feet touched the stone floor, continued to count down in his heart, waiting for an opportunity to make his move. At the same time, a burst of joy welled up in his chest. Haha, this is even better. This means that after I get out of this predicament, I will slowly torture you. At the very least, I will let you, Chen Pinggan, drag out an ignoble existence. If you follow me on that great Tao in the future, it will be more natural and smoother. In that case, your luck isn't too bad, kid. Moreover, the text imprisonment that the old man planted on Quidong was only targeted at Chen Pinggan. Quidong was not allowed to have any evil thoughts towards Chen Pinggan. Otherwise, he would suffer the pain of being whipped to the heart. Other than that, there were no restrictions on his actions. This could be considered to be of the same origin as the old man's knowledge. It was about tracing everything back to the source. Only after the source was cleared up could one spread their branches and leaves on moral essays and conduct themselves in the world. In the future, I, Quidong, want you to personally see how Qi Jingchuan's direct disciple, that little girl named Li Baoping, dies in front of you. Moreover, I want you to know what the struggle for great Tao is, and why she died. The time has come. Quidong's arms that were holding the mirror were already badly mangled. The wounds were so deep that the bones could be seen, but he didn't care. Rainbow-like sword energy, right? Inverted waterfall, right? Get out of my way. However, just as Quidong thought that he had succeeded, he was just a hair's breadth away. The straw sandals youth, who was firmly standing on the mouth of the well with his feet rooted to the ground, finally finished accumulating his strength. Although his soul was shaking and his internal organs were all in pain, he could only say softly with a trembling voice, "Let's go." The second waterfall poured down in torrents. "Damn you, Chen Pinggan. I'm going to die here because of you." This was Kui Dong's only thought at that moment. Chen Pinggan was on the verge of collapsing on the mouth of the well. Before this, Chen Pinggan sat in the pavilion for the second time that night. At that time, he and Li Baoping, who had woken up from a nightmare, sat across from each other in the pavilion. There was a sudden breeze that blew across the small pavilion for no reason. The youth remembered something and felt a little sad. At the same time, he closed his eyes with Li Baoping and listened carefully to the sound of the iron horse's wind chime under the eaves. At that time, the youth silently told himself in his heart, "Mr. Qi, if the sound of the wind chime under the eaves is an even number, just let it go and bear with that Kui guy. But if it's an odd number, I'll make a move." Ding dong, ding dong, ding ding dong. After the seventh sound, there was no more sound. Therefore, after the little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket left the pavilion, the youth stood on the edge of the well. Earlier, before the straw sandals youth left the town. At that time, under old Yang's reminder, Chen Pinggan left the Yang family's shop with an umbrella and went to the school teacher who visited old Yang and gave him the dual square mountain watermark. An adult and a child walked on the side street. A gentleman can be deceived. You can tell this to Senior Yang and the others. In the future, if you encounter something you can't solve, you can ask the spring breeze. Well, you just have to keep this in your heart. It might be useful in the future. But I hope it won't be necessary. After saying this, the white-haired scholar was not as old-fashioned and serious as when he taught in the school. He blinked and looked at the youth with a warm smile. When the youth left the town with the little girl, the last bit of the soul of a certain green-robed Confucian returned to the human world after going to a big cave in the sky beyond heaven. After walking side by side with the straw sandals youth and the little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket for a distance, he stopped and looked at the back of his junior brother and his disciple, no longer seeing them off. When the scholar finally waved his hand silently to say goodbye, with this gentle wave of his sleeve, there was a spring breeze lingering around the youth. It was silent and did not dissipate for a long time. In the well, together with the Thunder Department's seal mirror, the youth Kui Dong was smashed back to the bottom of the well. He curled up and lay on the extremely dry bluestone floor, trying to hide under the mirror. Although he tried his best to make a final struggle, in fact, Kui Dong's heart was completely disheartened. The mirror shook violently, bringing a huge impact to the white-clothed young man below. The sword energy's water flow after flowing through the mirror brought a huge burning sensation to the young man's body, causing his consciousness to blur. The moment he closed his eyes, the old scholar's seal on the youth Kui Dong's divine soul disappeared. The youth in white was refreshed, like a person who had just received rain after a long drought. He was especially energetic. Kui Dong did not dare to hold back. If he did not fight now, when would he? Haha, the heavens are helping me. Old man, I can't believe you would make such a mistake. Old man, there will be a day when you try to be clever and make a fool of yourself. The heavens are really helping me, Kui Dong. There is always a way out. One by one, the golden characters full of righteousness were peeled off from the divine soul of Kui Dong, whose face was twisted in pain. This kind of pain that made one's divine sense have nowhere to hide was more terrifying than being cut into pieces. But Kui Dong's mind was clearer and clearer. The teachings of the saint, using literature to carry the Tao. The youth in white controlled the temporarily ownerless golden characters to hit the waterfall of sword chi. The golden characters and the sword chi collided. There was not the least bit of momentum to speak of. But the more silent it was, the more shocking and suffocating it was. It was no longer a battle of strength or power, but a battle of the Tao in another form. This waterfall. After all, it was just an extremely small sword chi. And those golden characters were just temporarily borrowed by someone else. The two were in a deadlock, and in the end, it seemed like they were going to coincidentally fight to a situation where they were evenly matched. It was like two armies facing each other, and in the end, both sides suffered, both were completely annihilated. After perceiving the opportunity, Kui Dong did not wait for death. He began to sit up carefully, and then squatted little by little. Finally, he bent over and stood up. He moved to one side, and the mirror was instantly tilted, and the last of the sword chi fell to the other side of the inner wall of the well. The youth in white simply threw away the ancient mirror, and his feet touched the ground. His whole body soared into the sky, and then his figure disappeared in an instant. Only an extremely resentful and gloomy voice echoed in the ancient well, "Even if you have the third sword chi now, you are too late." Chen Pinggan stood at the mouth of the well, with the sword furnace in his hands. After the last sword chi left, he was ready to fight the enemy with his fists. In the preface of the Book of Shaking the Mountain, there was a clear opening. Those who practice my mountain quaking fist in the future, even if they face the ancestors of the three sects, remember that our fist technique can be weak, and we can lose the momentum to win, but our fist intent is the only thing that matters. Never retreat. At the same time, in the quiet courtyard, the little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket woke up again, not because of a nightmare, but because she was slapped awake by a locust tree sword. Li Baoping, who was in a daze, suddenly opened her eyes wide. The wooden sword that broke in the window quickly drew a word chi in the air, and then flew to the door with a whoosh. Li Baoping jumped out of bed at lightning speed, and ran barefoot without wearing boots. After opening the door, she followed the wooden sword to the room where the youngest uncle lived. Because Chen Pinggan had not come back, he did not lock the door, and it was knocked open by the flying sword. Li Baoping rushed in with the flying sword, and saw it pointing at the basket. In the end, Li Baoping took out a seal hidden by the youngest uncle under the guidance of the flying sword. After opening it, she found that it was the seal of tranquility and complacency that the youngest uncle secretly showed her once. Only then did the flying sword nod vigorously, and quickly flew out of the room. The little girl held the seal of tranquility that Mr. Fang gave to her youngest uncle, and followed the locust tree sword that inexplicably appeared in the basket, all the way to the pavilion. She jumped out of the pavilion with familiarity, and ran to the mouth of the well where the youngest uncle stood. In an instant, the seal in Li Baoping's hand broke free from her palm, and quickly flew to the mouth of the well, above her youngest uncle's head, and then with a dull thud. Above the mouth of the well, someone screamed, "Again? Qi Jing Chun, F*CKU. Are you F*King done yet?" A young man in white who inexplicably appeared above the mouth of the well was heavily hit on the forehead by a seal, and his whole body flew out and fell to the ground. The young man in white, who had no cultivation left, murmured before he fainted, "Qi Jing Chun, you win. I admit defeat." 149. Chen Pinggan widened his eyes. He saw that after the calm and proud seal hit the forehead of the white-clothed youth, it first bounced back and then froze in the air. In the end, it seemed to be pulled back by a string. However, the strength of the person pulling the string was a little weak. The calm seal swayed in the air, high and low, and its speed was not fast. Chen Pinggan followed its trajectory and saw that between him and Li Baoping, there was a locust wood sword hovering. There was a golden-clothed girl about the same height as his little finger. She was lying on all fours, hiding under the flying sword. Her hands and feet were tightly gripping the wooden sword. At this moment, she finally got up. After standing up, the adorable golden-clothed girl stood on the sword. She was dizzy and her footsteps were swaying like a drunkard. It seemed that this flying sword experience was not that good. The calm seal fell on the wooden sword. The seal was a little heavy, and the sword's tail was lifted up. The golden-clothed girl's whole body slid towards the seal in a fluster. Li Baoping also did not notice the golden-clothed girl's existence before. Now that she saw it, she only felt that it was interesting. She ran over happily, squatted slightly, and held the two ends of the locust wood sword with both hands. She stared at the little fellow who was trying to dodge at a close distance. The golden-clothed girl was stunned. She seemed to be very shy. After reaching out to cover her face, she put her feet together and jumped straight up. After landing, she actually disappeared into the locust wood sword. Chen Pinggan did not know the reason and did not want to be entangled in this matter. He reminded in a hoarse voice, Baoping, throw the wooden sword to me. You keep the seal first. Li Baoping immediately put away her curiosity. She knew that the most important thing now was to deal with the guy surnamed Kui. After grabbing the seal, she shouted and threw the locust wood sword at youngest martial uncle. However, the girl's strength was not controlled properly, and the locust wood sword was a little off from where Chen Pinggan was standing. Turn around. Chen Pinggan instructed Li Baoping. Then, with a tap of his foot, he stepped towards the left side of the old well. Stepping on the edge of the well, he accurately grasped the wooden sword and continued to take a big step forward. After landing on the ground, he stabbed the sword towards the white-clothed youth's chest. At this moment, the upper half of the golden-clothed girl's body was revealed from Chen Pinggan's wooden sword. She was on the verge of tears, full of regret and guilt. She shook her head and waved her hands vigorously, as if she wanted to stop Chen Pinggan from killing. However, Chen Pinggan was extremely decisive from the moment he caught the sword to the moment he attacked. By the time the golden-clothed girl appeared, the tip of the wooden sword was already pressed against the white-clothed youth's chest. Due to Chen Pinggan's years of practice, his control over his strength could be said to be very precise. Even if he wanted to withdraw his hand, the flow of qi in his body, the expansion and contraction of his arm muscles, and the inertia of the wooden sword could not allow Chen Pinggan to change the outcome. An old scholar with a cotton bag on his back suddenly appeared out of thin air. Thank goodness, thank goodness. I almost got tricked. With the appearance of the old scholar, the youth Kui Dong seemed to be grabbed by the neck and pulled back. Although he was still unconscious, his back was straight and he stood like a pine tree. Taking advantage of the situation, he avoided the fate of being pierced through the heart by Chen Pinggan. The old man looked at the rapidly retreating youth. With one hand holding the sword in front of him, he used the other hand to protect Li Baoping behind him. The way the youth held the sword was strange and awkward. It was probably like a woodcutter holding a brush. No matter how one looked at it, it did not seem right. The old man sighed. It's you. Chen Pinggan was facing a formidable enemy and did not dare to let his guard down. He said softly, Baoping, when you have the chance, run away. Don't worry about me. Chen Pinggan noticed that Li Baoping was tugging at his sleeves a few times. He was a little surprised and looked down. What's wrong? The little girl's face was stiff. She raised her arm and pointed behind Chen Pinggan. She opened her mouth and seemed to be mouthing two words. Ghost. Attacked from the front and the back. Chen Pinggan's heartstrings tightened. When he looked over, his face was dull. The youth blinked his eyes and blinked again. After making sure that he was not mistaken, he turned his back to the old scholar and the youth in white. He did not dare to say anything in case someone eavesdropped and harmed this fairy sister. However, he was really anxious. The youth wanted to say something but stopped. He was like an ant on a hot pan. Li Baoping secretly held the sleeve of her youngest uncle. She looked at the kind old man and then turned to look at the elusive female ghost. Compared to the female ghost in the wedding dress last time, the one tonight was wearing white clothes and white shoes. In her hand was a snow-white, big lotus leaf. Li Baoping was a little hesitant. Were all the female ghosts in the outside world so fresh and refined? She remembered that her elder brother had been coerced by her and had to tell her many bloody ghost stories. In the stories, there were pink skeletons, water ghosts, river spirits, and other spirits. They often cut open people's hearts and livers and ate human flesh. Their appearance and behavior were extremely terrifying. How could they be like the one in front of her? She was even more beautiful than the female ghost in the wedding dress. She was tall but still had a natural beauty hidden in her slim figure. Her black hair was like a waterfall. It wound from her back to her chest and was tied into a knot with a golden silk scarf. She looked very demure and dignified. Li Baoping only felt that the tall woman in front of her was really tall and beautiful. She was very envious. The little girl stood on tiptoe but soon stepped back on the ground, discouraged. The tall woman seemed to only have Chen Pinggan in her eyes. She smiled and said, "We are going to fight later. Don't be afraid of that old man. He only knows how to take a beating. Don't worry. This sister is not a bad person. She is one of us." Chen Pinggan comforted Li Baoping first. When he looked up again, he finally couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Didn't you say that we can't leave the town? What if the sages find out? What will you do?" The tall woman shook her wrist and the lotus leaf in her hand swayed gently. Her tone was gentle and slow. She had a temperament that made people feel at ease. "Do you know a place called the Lotus Cave?" Chen Pinggan suddenly remembered Ning Yarrow. He nodded and said, "Someone told me before that it was a place where the ancestors of Taoism went to relax. Although it is only one of the 36 small caves, the lotus leaf there, even the smallest one, is bigger than the capital of Dali." The woman smiled and said, "It's not that exaggerated. Take the lotus leaf in my hand for example. If it were to reveal its true form, it would have an area of about 5 kilometers. Of course, the largest lotus leaf there would definitely be much larger than the capital of Great Li. These lotus leaves can hide the secrets of heaven. In short, it can prevent the sages of the 3 sects and the masters of hundreds of schools from finding out my whereabouts." She saw Chen Pinggan's puzzled face and explained with a smile, "When we met, I didn't have this good thing in my hand. Before Qi Jingchun left the human world, he went to the sky beyond heaven and found the Taoist ancestor. He bargained with that old man and helped me get this lotus leaf umbrella. As for what Qi Jingchun paid, I don't know. After all, the word quiet is a taboo. Within the orthodoxy of Taoism, many people are dissatisfied with it. So I can be sure that Qi Jingchun left the vast world and went to the Lotus Cave to pay a great price." Speaking of this, even the tall woman's eyes showed a hint of trance. She sincerely admired the Confucian disciple. After Qi Jingchun returned to the human world from the sky beyond heaven, they had a last chat. "This lotus leaf. I went to the sky beyond heaven and picked it from the Lotus Cave. It can help you leave this place without disturbing the great Tao of heaven and earth. You don't have to worry about the sage's inquiry. It is a good thing. But aren't you afraid that Chen Pinggan will become unscrupulous with me around and become the kind of person that you, Qi Jingchun, don't like?" "I, Qi Jingchun, know Chen Pinggan's temperament very well. So I am never worried that Chen Pinggan will bully others. Even if you protect him from the beginning to the end, I, Qi Jingchun, am not worried." "You think so highly of Chen Pinggan? What do you think?" "He is my little junior brother. You and Chen Pinggan are peers, and I recognize him as my master." "So, Qi Jingchun, what do you mean?" "Haha, I wouldn't dare." Thinking of this, the tall woman sighed slightly in her heart. It was a pity that there was no Qi Jingchun in the world. Li Baoping, who was not afraid of anything, said timidly for the first time, "Sister, you are so beautiful." The tall woman nodded and said with a smile, "Yes, much more beautiful than you." Not only was she rude, but her words were also hurtful. The little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket was a little stunned and speechless. Chen Pinggan was covered in cold sweat. On the other side behind Chen Pinggan, there was also a reunion. The old man stared at the white-clothed youth who had woken up. The youth stared back, thinking, "I am not afraid of you. Why should I be afraid of you?" The old man looked at the tall woman first, and the latter nodded to indicate that it was okay. The old man then looked at the youth and said angrily, "Aren't you Kuidong very smart? Then let's review the situation now. Have you thought about why I would suddenly lose control of those characters and allow you to separate them from your soul? Moreover, they just happen to be on par with the Tao insight contained within that strand of sword chi, causing both of them to wear each other down, allowing you to charge out of the well at that time and have the opportunity to execute a killing move against Chen Pinggan. Have you ever thought that in the end, you might be killed by Chen Pinggan with one punch, and Chen Pinggan would be seriously injured by you at the same time?" The youth Kui Dong's expression was uncertain. In the end, he curled his lips in a fit of pique and pretended to be indifferent. It was nothing more than a sage of the Confucian school. What's so strange about it? Even Qi Jingchun was willing to walk into that dead end and wait for death. So what if I, Kui Dong, was schemed against once? The youth became angrier as he spoke. He pointed at the shabby old scholar and said, "Old man, you still have the nerve to say this. Qi Jingchun, whom you placed your greatest hope in, is dead. Ma Zhon, who was the weakest, is also dead. And that guy surnamed Zhuo is completely gone. I, Kui Dong, am also reduced to such a state. In the end, isn't it all because of you? In the world, you are the one who writes the best, has the deepest meaning, and has been helping the world for the longest time. Is that enough? He is a secondary sage, the third highest in the Confucian temple. He advocates that the people are the most important, the emperor is the least important, and the country is the second most important. You are amazing, but you insist on talking about heaven, earth, emperor, family, and teacher. The secondary sage said that human nature is good, but you are saying that human nature is evil. Damn you, what did the secondary sage do to you? The youth was so angry that he stomped his feet. This habitual action was actually of the same origin as the old scholar. He pointed his finger at the old scholar's nose and said, "What's worse is that the secondary sage is not much older than you. Maybe he is still in the mortal world, living well. Old man, why are you so stubborn? If you go and scold the sage of rites or the sage of ceremonies, the secondary sage might even help you, right? You just have to go against the secondary sage." I'm convinced. The old scholar did not say anything. He just gently wiped the saliva that the youth had spat on his face. If they were from a small family, quarreling with each other behind closed doors wasn't a big deal at all. One had to know that a quasi-sage and a scholar sage were involved in the battle of the third and fourth ranks that shocked the entire Confucian faction and all the schools and academies. The two sages, especially since the two in front of the Confucian temple had long disappeared, represented the entire Confucian faction. They were the Confucian faction that set the rules for the vast world. Although there were no signs of the Confucian school falling apart, the leaders of the neighboring families were able to see the big picture from a small clue. How could they not be secretly happy? After that, an extremely secretive bet was made within the Confucian school. The loser was willing to accept his loss and was imprisoned in the Forest of Merits. The old scholar lost and waited for his death there. He allowed his statue in the Confucian temple to move again and again until he was smashed into pieces. However, when the disciple that he was most proud of went to another continent to fight against the heavenly Tao and died, the old scholar had no choice but to make an agreement with all the sages, not just the scholarly sage, in order to break the oath. After all, if the oath of the sages could be easily broken, then this world with its strict rules would have changed beyond recognition. The old scholar voluntarily gave up his body and the many supernatural powers of the scholarly sage. He only used his spirit to wander between heaven and earth. The old scholar waited until the young man had his hands on his hips and was panting with his head lowered. He asked, "Are you done? Is it time for me to reason with you?" After the young man in white vented his anger, Kui Dong recalled the old man's deeds and felt guilty and timid. He did not say a word. The old scholar sighed and said, "Who taught Qi Jingchun how to play chess?" Kui Dong immediately held his head high and said, "I did." The old man was expressionless and said slowly, "I once told all of you that when you reason with someone, even if it's a quarrel or a debate, you must be calm." Kui Dong immediately kept quiet out of fear and said in a low voice, "It was me. Qi Jingchun was not smart enough to play chess. After losing to me a few times, he refused to play again." The old man asked again, "Then who taught you how to play chess?" Kui Dong did not want to say the answer. The old scholar snorted and said, "I did." Kui Dong felt wronged and his teeth itched. "Old man, do you know what it means to set an example?" The old scholar took a deep breath and said, "When you taught Qi Jingchun how to play chess, compared to me, who was better?" Kui Dong said reluctantly, "I was not as good as you." The old man asked, "Then did you know that Qi Jingchun learned how to play chess and quickly beat me?" The young man was stunned. He did not doubt the truth of the old man's words. The old man asked again, "Do you know what Qi Jingchun said in private?" "He said to me, senior apprentice brother really likes to play chess, and his desire to win is a bit heavy. I don't want to lie when I play chess. If senior apprentice brother always loses to me, then he will lose a happy thing in the future." Kui Dong stiffened his neck and said, "Even if that is the case, so what?" The old man was angry that he did not fight back and lamented his misfortune. He reprimanded him, "You are so stubborn. You are always quick to learn your mistakes and slow to admit them, As for correcting them, Humph, Kui Dong said angrily, it was you who taught me. The old man stared at him and was silent for a moment. He said regretfully, Ma Zhon's betrayal may have disappointed Qi more than your plan, Kui Dong. Kui Dong sneered and said, I don't care to talk about people like Ma Zhon. His heart is higher than the sky and his life is thinner than paper. If I am doing it for the opportunity of the Great Way and for the family line, then what about him? He is willing to be someone else's chess piece for the sake of being the hill master of the academy and the hope of controlling a school in the future. He really deserves to die. Old man, you gave Qi Jingchun a parting sentence, you can't learn anymore. The green takes the blue, and the blue is better than the blue. This sentence is widely spread and I know it. But what did you give Ma Zhon? The old man said indifferently, heaven and earth give birth to a gentleman, and a gentleman rules heaven and earth. What a pity. It was not known whether it was the sentence or Ma Zhon himself that was pitiful. Kui Shi said sarcastically, after Ma Zhon left the town with those children, he had a pleasant conversation with one of my pawns. They were quite frank and honest with each other. They brought up the issue of whether to leave Liju Cave Heaven or continue to stay. He had a dispute with Qi Jingchun. In the end, Qi Jingchun said something very strange to him that scared Ma Zhon a little. A gentleman should restrain himself when necessary and stretch himself when necessary. Ma Zhon was an idiot. After Qi Jingchun's earth-shattering death, he still followed his selfish desires and dreamed of being a mountain chieftain of the academy. It was only when he was about to die that he realized that Qi Jingchun had already known about his actions when she was in the school. She just didn't want to expose him and still hoped that he, Ma Zhon, could take good care of those children. Ma Zhon is really slow. After 2 perfunctory delays, he finally knew that everything was over. For the only time in his life, he finally aroused the courage of a man. At the cost of losing his next life, he hurt that chess piece of mine. Only then could those children return to the small town. In the end, so many things happened. At the end, the young man in white became more and more weak. The old elementary scholar sighed. There were many people and things in Liju Cave. Especially in the last 60 years when Qi Jingchun was in charge, the heavenly mystery had been isolated even more tightly. Qi Jingchun, old Yang, and some people behind the scenes had secretly taken action, making this small cave become blurred and full of variables. Even the old elementary scholar found it difficult to deduce, and he dared not say that the deduced truth was the truth. The gentle voice of the tall woman sounded softly. Are you done talking? Kui Dong found the old elementary scholar's face was a little ugly and sighed heavily. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the woman looking at him. The old elementary scholar had no choice but to take off the bag on his back and take out a scroll. He gently untied the string that tied the scroll. Chen Pinggan was confused. She walked to Chen Pinggan and said with a smile, "You can use your sword 3 times later." She squinted and looked at the sky outside the lotus leaves. She said slowly, "I will restore my real body later. You don't have to be surprised." Finally, she seemed to remember something and said apologetically, "I forgot to say 2 words." Chen Pinggan raised his head. The tall woman stopped smiling and said respectfully, "Master." 150. Although the little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket was briefly discouraged, she was Li Baoping. Alas, she was soon in high spirits. She quietly moved away and sneaked behind the tall woman from the left side. Then, she walked to the right side of the tall woman. Looking at her clothes and her big lotus leaf, Li Baoping felt that she was really beautiful. After hearing Kui Dong's cursing and the old man's scolding, Chen Pinggan figured out something, but he still couldn't believe it. He swallowed and whispered to the tall woman, "This old man, are you Mr. Qi's teacher? Is he the sage of literature? The sage of Confucianism?" No wonder the journey was so full of ups and downs. He would meet Alliance in a bamboo hat, the land sword was in the wind snow temple, and of course, this man surnamed Kui. The tall woman nodded and said with a smile, "Yes." The woman's real body was the sword spirit bred by the old sword hanging under the stone arch bridge. During the long wait of nearly 10,000 years, she once witnessed the fall of the last real dragon. In that epic battle, The great Qi trainers of the 3 religions and the 100 schools of philosophers worked together, but there were still countless casualties. The corpses of those who died in the battle fell to the ground like rain, and their souls were condensed and did not disperse. Together with the fate of the real dragon after its death, they finally created the Dragon Pearl Cave. However, she regarded it as a child's play. This sword spirit watched coldly from the beginning to the end. Occasionally, her eyes lit up, and she secretly picked up a few beautiful objects without anyone noticing. She originally thought that she would spend the rest of her life either sleeping or yawning, visualizing those magnificent ancient ruins and drifting around them. She was even worse than a wandering ghost, drifting with the waves in the river of time bit by bit, waiting for the day when the spiritual energy would disperse completely. However, when the Dragon Pearl Cave was broken, she chose Chen Pinggan as her second master, not Ning Yao, who was born to be a great sword whiz, not Ma Kushuan, who had a good background, not Xie Shi or Cao Shi, who were born and raised in a small town. Qi Jingchun had contributed greatly to all of this. First, it was that night when Qi Jingchun sat alone on the covered bridge until dawn, right under the inscribed board. His purpose was to persuade her to open her eyes and take a look at the boy from Mud Bottle Alley, even if it was just a glance. Actually, the sword spirit did not feel anything at first glance. She had seen too many surprises in her life. Therefore, she was indifferent. To her, whether the Black Pearl Grotto heaven collapsed or the heavenly Tao retaliated and the people suffered, it did not affect her at all. However, she was indeed a little curious. Why did Qi Jingchun, a scholar who was said to have the potential to establish a sect, choose a child who had not even studied before? So after that day, she looked at the young man a few more times, but she still didn't feel anything. Later, when she was really bored, she finally remembered that before Qi Jingchun left, he used his identity as the sage of the small town to intercept the Yi Shui in the River of Time for the last 10 years in the Black Pearl Grotto Heaven. It was fished up by Qi Jingchun with great magic and placed under the covered bridge. Therefore, one day, when she had nothing to do, she had to find something to do, right? She began to show her real body, hovering above the water under the covered bridge. She combed her hair while watching the water. It was all bits and pieces of the boy from Mud Bottle Alley. There were hidden plots behind the scenes, trivial matters in the streets, good deeds with hidden evil intentions, and disasters caused by unintentional actions. There were family affairs, joys and sorrows, sadness and sincerity, life and death. She thought it was quite interesting, much more interesting than watching a group of children fighting and beating up a small worm. For example, there was a child who carried a basket that was almost half his height, saying that he was going to the mountain to pick herbs. But before he went up the mountain, he cried earth-shatteringly. Another example was a child standing on a small stool, holding a spatula in his hand and muttering that he must cook a delicious meal tonight. It was neither salty nor bland, just right. Another example was a child who ran away from the Tanghulu stall, drooling as he ran. He could only imagine how it tasted when he was young. Finally, another example was a child who, in order to survive, fished in the depths of the stream at noon. He didn't know that it was difficult for immortals to catch fish at noon, and his skin was darker than charcoal. The sword spirit knew that these were all hardships, but she never felt that they were unbearable. Because the sword spirit had followed her master on expeditions everywhere, mountains of corpses and seas of blood, and the remains of gods could be piled up into mountains. The monster cores of those big monsters could be strung into Tanghulu, which was crispy and crunchy. Those figures that turned into extraterrestrial demons covered the sky and the sun, and could be destroyed with a sword. So when Qi Jingchun found her again, she was still unwilling to agree. But when Qi Jingchun, a sage who was good at reasoning, was at his wit's end, Qi Jingchun took back the handful of water of time and gently poured it into Dragon's whisker stream on the covered bridge. Those scenes flowed slowly, from the youth Chen Pinggan, who was in a hurry to deliver the letter, to the child Chen Pinggan, who was in the immortal's tomb, praying for his mother's health. The moment Qi Jingchun poured the water, he decided not to insist on persuading the sword spirit. He began to walk to the end of the covered bridge, and at the last moment of his great disappointment, an unintentional sentence finally moved the stone-hearted sword spirit. "We are all very disappointed in this world." The sword spirit remained calm and collected. The last scene was of the child bidding farewell to his father in Mud Bottle Alley. "Father, I'm 5 years old, I'm an adult." The sword spirit looked at the figure and said, "Let him walk on the covered bridge. If he can persist, I'll consider it." Chi Jing-chun turned around in shock, then laughed heartily and nodded vigorously. "I believe in Chen Pingan, please believe in Chi Jing-chun." The man strode down the steps of the covered bridge, his two big sleeves swaying violently, as if they were filled with Chi Jing-chun's youth. The sword spirit's thoughts were interrupted by the youth's question. The youth asked cautiously, "Since she's Mr. Chi's teacher, can we not fight?" The sword spirit let go of the snow-white lotus leaf in her hand. It first floated into the sky, then suddenly became huge, holding up the vast sky with a radius of 10 miles. She shook her head and said, "For Mr. Chi, you have to fight." Chen Pingan scratched his head and said, "Although I don't know why, since it has something to do with Mr. Chi, and you said so, I believe you." The youth paused for a moment, his eyes firm. He stared at the tall woman and grinned. "Let's fight." She smiled knowingly and shifted her gaze to the old man who was still delaying. He had spent half a day to untie the knot on the binding scroll, but he was still muttering. "I used to only know how to hide in the study room and missed a lot. After leaving the Forest of Merits, I wanted to try a life I didn't dare to imagine before, such as drinking to my heart's content, quarreling with people with thick necks, eating spicy food, swimming in the water shirtless, and so on. I've been to many places and seen many famous mountains and rivers." She joked, "Master Wensheng, it's not over yet. Your neck will be cut by a knife, yes, a sword. It's meaningless to drag it out like this." The old man said angrily, "I'm waiting for you two to change your mind." She narrowed her eyes and said coldly, "Old man, don't take advantage of me." The old scholar laughed. "Old man?" Her smile became gentler. "I'll remember it." The old man had nothing to lose. "Let's fight, I'm not afraid of you." "Do you really think I can't fight?" "That's just a comparison of my quarreling skills." The old elementary scholar had finally untied the knot. He flicked his wrist and the scroll made a popping sound as it unfurled and fell to the ground. The old elementary scholar held the scroll in his hand. The scroll was extremely long and it covered the entire area around the well. Chen Pingan had wanted to take a step forward but was stopped by the tall woman who held him by the shoulder, preventing him from moving. The bold Li Baoping simply squatted on the ground and carefully observed it. She didn't forget to poke here and there. The young man standing behind the old man, Kui Dong, was helping the old scholar carry his luggage. The old man shouted, "Withdraw." At the old well, Li Baoping, who was squatting on the ground to study the mountains and rivers, suddenly woke up. The scroll on the ground was gone. Moreover, her martial uncle and the ghost sister with a bad temper, as well as her teacher's teacher, the old man whom she should call Grandmaster, had all disappeared. She looked up and saw that the scroll had returned to a scroll, quietly hovering in the air. The young man Kui Dong didn't find this strange. He stood there obediently holding his luggage, his face full of grief and resentment. She suddenly stood up, raised the seal high and asked loudly, "Surnamed Kui, where is my martial uncle? If you don't tell me, I'll hit you. I've never hit anyone lightly. If I accidentally hit you to death, I won't be responsible." Kui Dong looked at the little girl, his face indifferent. He nodded and said, "You can just hit me to death. Provocation, right? Forget about the woman in white. You bastard, you're also here?" Li Baoping was stunned for a moment, then she became furious. Without saying a word, she ran away. After bypassing the painting, she, who was shorter than the young man in white, jumped nimbly and smashed the seal in her hand heavily on Quisha's head. The young man Kui Dong's face was full of disbelief and his eyes were dazed. He reached out and touched his swollen forehead. He suddenly threw away his luggage and squatted on the ground. He held his head and shouted, "I can't live like this anymore. Everyone can bully me." The little girl felt guilty for no reason. She held the seal behind her back and secretly hid the tools. Then she began to study the scroll, hoping to find her martial uncle. Chen Pingan looked around. It was a bit like when he was first pulled into the bottom of the water by the sword spirit. There was nothing around, so some of the objects seemed particularly real. For example, There was a high wall in the distance. No matter how Chen Pingan stretched his neck, he couldn't see the end of the wall. The woman in white standing beside him reached out and held the black hair tied together by a golden knot. She smiled and said, "This is in the Book of Mountains and Rivers, and also in the consciousness of the sage of literature. It's complicated and troublesome to talk about it. You only need to know that you can use your sword here. This is also one of the reasons why I agreed to the old man's request. Otherwise, we would have fought on the cliff by the river." Her other hand suddenly pressed on Chen Pingan's shoulder. "It's too close now, so you can't see the real appearance. I'll take you back a little. Let's go back 800 miles first." Chen Pingan felt that his whole body was moving as fast as lightning. He didn't know how far they had retreated. When he finally stood still, the teenager couldn't care less about the discomfort in his body and the boiling in his mansion of qi. He opened his mouth and looked at that mountain. How could a mountain that was 800 miles away be so huge? Compared to it, his hometown, Mount Biyun, should be like a small mound. The tall woman's face was solemn. "There's another more important reason. If the sage of literature agreed to fight here, he can give you some extra treatment." Chen Pingan was so shocked that he couldn't be any more shocked. His mouth was a little dry. She stared at the teenager's eyes. "Here, when you use your sword, you will have the cultivation of a 10th realm qi cultivator. Of course, this is an illusion, but it's a very real illusion. I hope that when you're here, you can carefully experience it. It's not very useful for your future cultivation." She was amused by herself. She couldn't help but laugh. "All right, I just want you to know one thing. Don't just focus on practicing martial arts. Especially if you always think that practicing martial arts is for survival. That's too useless. How can your ambition be so small? Think about it. Who are you?" Chen Pingan replied in a daze. Chen Pingan? It was fine if he didn't answer the question. The key was that if he wasn't Chen Pingan, who else could he be? She bent down and rubbed the teenager's head. "Other than being Chen Pingan, you're also my master." The teenager was a little embarrassed. At the peak of the mountain, an old man said angrily, "All right, you were so anxious before. Now you're not." The sword spirit took a deep breath and pointed at the mountain. "That's the largest of the 5 peaks in the central divine continent." Chen Pingan nodded. She looked at the mountain in the distance, her eyes burning. "Then if the mountain blocks your path, what will you do?" Chen Pingan said softly, "Crawl over." The corner of her mouth curled up. She wasn't angry. She asked again, "But what if you have a sword in your hand?" Chen Pingan recalled the scene of himself opening a path with a hatchet in his hand. He asked, "Cutting through the mountain?" She laughed loudly. "Yes." The tall woman strode forward and stood in front of Chen Pingan. She stretched out her fingers and slowly swiped them from left to right. A tiny dot of light suddenly exploded at the leftmost position. It was like the sun in the sky. Then it spread all the way to the right. With every inch of the blinding light, the tall woman's figure dimmed a little. Finally, Chen Pingan saw a sheathless sword hovering in front of him. It seemed like it had been waiting for someone to hold it for thousands of years. The light had already dissipated. The teenager slowly walked forward and grasped the hilt of the sword. In an instant, the teenager holding the sword felt like the world was turning upside down. All of his qi abodes and acupoints were shaking. The air around him was chaotic, blowing so hard that the teenager could barely open his eyes. Chen Pingan closed his eyes and said telepathically, "Let's go." The sword trembled madly. It was like an autumn cicada on the highest branch, crying out to the world. 151. The old scholar stood on a huge rock at the top of the mountain, his sleeves fluttering in the wind. At this moment, the white-haired old man standing tall against the wind did not look shabby at all. The old scholar looked 800 miles away at the light that suddenly lit up. Even at such a distance, the old man still felt that it was somewhat dazzling. The old man nodded slightly and said, "After so many years, although the edge of the sword is much blunter than in the legends, the sharpness within has not decreased by much. Powerful, truly powerful. After 10,000 years, The sea has changed into mulberry fields, but it still has such essence. But the old scholar quickly smiled and said, I will use this mountain to make you retreat. When it comes to fighting, it is best to avoid fighting as much as possible. It will hurt the harmony. The mountain under the old man's feet that he had visualized into a painting was so famous that it couldn't be any more famous. In the central divine continent, which had the largest territory of the 9 great continents, there was a mountain named Sway Mountain. The mountain was majestic and could be said to be connected to the heavens. At the top of the mountain was a stele inscribed with the words only one in the world, ancestor of the 5 mountains, astral winds come left behind by the first disciple of the Tao ancestor, and my Wudang inscribed with the fingers of the military saint. There were more than 180 stone inscriptions of the past emperors of different continents, who came here to pray and announce to the heavens. These inscriptions, which were full of mystery, extended all the way from the heavenly platform at the peak of Sway Mountain down to the mountainside. Scenic spots and historical sites could be seen almost everywhere. The old scholar looked at the bright light of the sword and was somewhat surprised. When he first appeared at the old well, he saw Chen Pinggan holding the sword. It was really unbearable to look at. Even the old scholar, who was not particular about martial arts, could not bear to see it. But at this moment, seeing the way the young man held the sword in front of him, the old man only had one thought. Steady. The young man's hand holding the sword was very steady. His heart was very calm and very steady, so his spirit and will were even more steady. After the tall woman poured all of her sword will into the old sword bar, in the next moment, she appeared on the lake in the heart of the young man, Chen Pinggan, with an even more illusory figure and a mysterious aura. She had golden eyes and bare feet. When her toes gently touched the surface of the lake, ripples appeared. Then, the young man's voice sounded. Her warm voice resonated in the young man's heart. Don't be in a hurry to attack. Get used to the feeling of being a Realm 10 Chi refinement warrior first. There are only a few types of sword moves, and there aren't many variations. This was the difference between the Jianghu of the later generations and the immortals on the mountain. Chi refinement warriors practiced Chi, combining nurturing and refining into one. There were thousands of sword intents that could be nurtured. Some were deep, some were shallow, some were high, and some were low. If others are wells and streams, you are lakes and rivers. Naturally, you are thousands of times better than others. The length of the sword Qi depends on the state of the body's Qi dwelling. The more openings there are in the Qi dwelling, the deeper the potential. Others only have an inferior grade blessed land, but you have all of them. The difference between the two is like heaven and earth. The meridians are like roads, the tougher and wider they are. Others have a single plank bridge and a winding path, but you have a great path to heaven. How can they compete with you? She looked around. After seeing the young man's mental state, she was full of smiles and said softly, "Do you understand?" The young man was struggling to get used to the feeling of being a Realm 10 Chi refinement warrior. In addition, the airflow around his body was extremely chaotic. He could not even open his eyes, let alone speak. Fortunately, she told him that he only needed to think in his heart. The young man told her honestly, "I understand, but I don't know how to do it." She was not surprised at all and laughed out loud. Chen Pinggan did not understand. He continued to try his best to get used to being a Realm 10 Chi refinement warrior. That strange feeling was indescribable. It was like a starving person who suddenly had his stomach stuffed with fish and meat. There was not a single gap left, and all of his Qi dwellings were opened up. That vital Qi that had originally been like a roaming fire dragon suddenly changed from the size of a needle to the size of an exaggerated loach. It swam rapidly in all of his meridians, rampaging and unobstructed. Along the way, it continuously engulfed the vital Qi in all of his Qi dwellings and acupoints. It was like a rolling snowball. It looked like it would not stop until it became a real flood dragon. His body was as clear as glass. The meridians of his torso stretched like golden branches and jade leaves. Pure vital Qi, returning to one's natural state, seeing and living for a long time. The sayings that Lin Shuyi had mentioned before appeared in Chen Pinggan's mind one after another. "Above the Heart Lake," she said softly, "it's still a little short. Swordsmen are not ordinary chi refinement warriors after all. Then she raised her head and looked into the distance. Through Chen Pingan's elixir chamber, she looked directly at the huge rock on the peak of the mountain. She smiled and asked, "What do you think? Otherwise, if you shamelessly used this sway mountain to defend against the enemy, it would be too unfair. I want you to lose wholeheartedly." The old elementary scholar understood and laughed heartily. After a slight hesitation, he retracted his gaze and looked around the entire mountain. Finally, his gaze focused on a cliff. On it, there was a strange calligraphy written by an ancient sword immortal with abundant sword chi. It was the flying sword calligraphy that attracted countless sword cultivators in the Central Plains. Some even built huts at the bottom of the cliff to comprehend the way of the sword. Just take it. How much you can take depends on your ability. Back then, little Zhuo was like you. Before he officially learned the way of the sword, he inadvertently climbed the mountain to look at the calligraphy. Just by looking, he took 6 words. One's talent in swordsmanship can be seen immediately. Among sword cultivators, there are many geniuses, but there are also big and small geniuses. These 5 words will definitely make you a sword immortal. Chen Pingan, let's see how good your foundation is. The old elementary scholar waved his sleeve and the 7 ancient characters on the cliff flew out of the cliff and swept towards Chen Pingan, who was 800 miles away. In the blink of an eye, they reached Chen Pingan's side. They had already become palm-sized ancient characters, shining with golden light and shining brightly. One by one, the characters revolved around Chen Pingan rapidly. But in the end, not a single word was willing to come close to Chen Pingan. The distance between them grew wider and wider. Finally, they turned around and flew back. After seeing this scene, the old elementary scholar was embarrassed and guilty. He muttered, "I overreached myself. Little Pingan, I'm sorry. Who would have thought that these characters would be so disrespectful?" The woman who stepped on Chen Pingan's heart lake snorted coldly. The old elementary scholar smiled awkwardly. "Tricky, really tricky. What should I do?" Don't worry, I'll just change to a more convenient method. It won't be a problem for me. I'm old friends with Mount Sway's mountain god. I'm well aware of his background. If it doesn't work, I'm not surprised that those 7 words don't like me." At this moment, Chen Pingan opened his eyes a little. He stopped talking to the tall woman through his mind and directly said, "And in fact, I don't want them, really." She was shocked. The young man increased his strength and held the long sword in his hand. He slowly said, "When I was practicing boxing, I always had a feeling that at the end of the practice, my fist would be very fast. I even felt that it would be the fastest. Now that I have you by my side, I feel that it's enough. I don't need any words at all. The next sword will be very fast. Believe me, it will be very fast." The woman nodded. The old elementary scholar was also stunned. He clicked his tongue and said, "Your tone is really like Xiao Qis when he was young." There was a smile in the old elementary scholar's eyes, but he deliberately raised his voice and snorted coldly. "I'd like to see if this sword can make you, a kid, at the 10th level, exert the strength of the 11th or 12th level. Chen Pingan, don't drag me down. In the end, you'll only show the strength of the 7th or 8th level. Come. If you don't show me this sword, it'll be too late." After the old elementary scholar finished teasing the young man, he sat cross-legged and murmured, "There's a saying in the school of poetry. 10 years to sharpen a sword, yet the frost blade has never been tested. Today, I'll show it to the ruler. Who has injustice? But there are so many injustices in the world, yet there's only one sword." The old scholar smiled and no longer felt sad. He gloated and said, "Besides, other people take 10 years to sharpen their sword. Chen Pingan, the sword in your hand must have been sharpened for 10,000 years." Chen Pingan and the tall woman both said in a low voice, "Let's go." Chen Pingan began to run forward. The young man actually dragged his sword and ran. The old elementary scholar who saw all of this just smiled and shook his head. The young man ran forward with his head held high. The young man jumped high and chopped down with his sword. Everything was silent. There was no shocking sword light that illuminated the world. There was no sword chi that pierced through the rainbow. But at this moment, the old elementary scholar who was originally sitting on the giant rock at the peak of the mountain turned and sat sideways. On the surface of the Heart Lake, the woman suddenly fell to the bottom of the lake. She closed her eyes and said slowly, "It's been 10,000 years." At the same time, beside the well of the Autumn Reed Inn, Li Baoping, who had been studying the scroll, suddenly opened her eyes wide. She shouted in surprise, "Why did the scroll suddenly have an extra crack?" 152. Kui Dong, who had been sitting on the ground in a daze, glanced at the little girl and the painting scroll. He said angrily, "Even if the sky falls down, this painting scroll won't be damaged at all." On the phone, "Do you know what it means when the sky falls down? There was once a nameless person in the Earth-divine continent who pierced through the celestial river with his sword and directly drew down the endless water from a yellow river cave. From afar, it looked like a huge hole had been torn open in the sky and water was pouring down. This created the second of the 10 sceneries in the world, the Yellow River Heavens, as well as the White Emperor City in the colorful clouds. The city lord of White Emperor City was incredible. He was one of the few people who dared to call himself the devil cult's orthodoxy. He was very dissolute. I once had the fortune to have a talk with him. At the Colorful Clouds River outside White Emperor City, it was known as the 10 Colorful Clouds Games. He lost more than he won, but even though he lost, it was still a glorious defeat. After all, the flag with the words honoring heaven to play chess first had been erected on the city wall of White Emperor City for more than 600 years. The number of chess players who were qualified to play chess with the city lord could be counted with one's fingers. The little girl didn't like to listen to such nonsense. She said angrily, "What are you showing off for?" I said, "The painting scroll is broken, so it is broken. If I win, do you want me to stamp my seal on your forehead? Do you dare to bet?" "Bet." Kui Dong immediately became interested. His dejected expression was swept away. He suddenly stood up, patted his butt, and asked with a smile, "What if I win?" Li Baoping said generously, "If young martial uncle comes out of the painting scroll and still insists on killing you, then I'll go back and collect your corpse. Tell me, where do you want to be buried? How about the immortal graveyard in our town? I go there often, and I'm more familiar with the road there. It can save me a lot of trouble." Kui Dong grimaced and stretched out his hand. "Stop, stop. If I win, help me persuade Chen Pingan. Not only can he not kill me, but he also wants to take me as his disciple." The moment he left the old well, he was heavily hit on the forehead by Qi Jingchuan's complacent meditation seal, which completely destroyed the last bit of great spirit in this body. He really fell from the 5 states cultivator to an ordinary person. As Qi Jingchun said at the Yuan family's old house, if he didn't repent, he would make Kui Dong suffer. However, the general trend of the Eastern Aquarius continent was like this. Dali went down south, and the arrow on the bow had to be released. Moreover, Kui Dong himself walked on the road of Tao, and there was no turning back. He couldn't retreat even half a step. Therefore, even if he was sure that Qi Jingchun had a backup plan, Kui Dong still did what he should do. At most, he would be more careful in his actions and words. But no matter what, whether it was the young Kui Dong or the imperial tutor Kui Dong in the capital city, no matter how treacherous, bloodthirsty, or shrewd he was, he never lacked the magnanimity to admit defeat. This was something that Kui Sha had never given up on ever since he became a disciple, from the start of his life as a student, to the state teacher of the small northern Aquarius continent. Li Baoping shook her head and said, "Even if I win, I won't agree to this kind of thing." Kui Dong blinked. "If you don't do this kind of business, how can you become a little teacher of Cliff Academy, a female teacher?" Li Baoping looked at this martial uncle of the past with disdain. The little girl had said her own words, and it was as if she had killed a tiger that was entrenched in her heart. She never cared about collecting corpses. With a leap, she ran to an unknown distance to find her next opponent. Even teacher Qi Jingchun was once helpless against this. The little girl raised her arm and waved the white seal in her hand. "Are you afraid?" Kui Dong chuckled and said, "A little girl who grew up in the mountains, I won't lower myself to your level." Li Baoping slowly retracted her arm and lightly exhaled at the seal. It was as if she was preparing to find a place to stamp it. Kui Dong swallowed his saliva. Li Baoping, don't be like this. If you have something to say, let's talk it over. We are all Confucian students. A gentleman uses his mouth, not his fists. After all, we are fellow disciples of the same sect. Besides, aren't you afraid that Martial Uncle won't like you in the future after seeing how arrogant you are? Aren't you afraid? Li Baoping laughed happily. Martial Uncle won't like me. The person Martial Uncle likes the most in the world is me, Kui Dong sighed. But one day, your Martial Uncle will have a girl he likes the most. The little girl said without hesitation, then the second person will like me. That's something to be happy about. Kui Dong looked at her as if she were a fairy or a ghost. Is that even possible? The little girl suddenly revealed the exact same expression and looked behind Kui Dong. Kui Dong turned his head, thinking that some accident had happened. His body couldn't withstand the slightest bit of torment, but in an instant, Kui Dong knew that something was wrong. There was nothing behind him, nothing out of the ordinary. A seal hit his forehead at lightning speed, causing Kui Dong to fall backward on the spot. During the process of falling to the ground, the young Kui Dong was inconsolable. This was the third time. Lying on the ground with his face up, Kui Dong said angrily, Li Baoping, if you dare to use the seal to attack me again, you will drop from the second favorite to the third favorite, and so on. Think about it yourself. I, Kui Dong, was once the scholarly sage. No matter what, my words should have some weight. Don't say that I didn't warn you. Of course, these were deceptive words. The scholarly sage did have the supernatural power to speak the heavenly law, but the requirements for the inherited fate and the nourishment of one's own great spirit were extremely strict. Now, Kui She was empty-handed except for the external belongings stored in the Fengtsuan treasure and a bag of golden branches and jade leaves. To make matters worse, the Fengtsuan treasure was like the narrowest cave in the world. Even if the owner of the Fengtsuan treasure was connected with the Fengtsuan treasure, there were requirements for the realm of the Qi cultivator. Kui She's Fengtsuan treasure required the owner to be at least at the 5th state of cultivation. For others to forcefully break through, they had to be at least at the 10th state, such as the sword cultivator of the military school. As for the 11th state, it was easy to open. The reason was simple. The treasure was one's home, but the door was locked. The 5th level of cultivation was the key in the owner's hand, and the owner had to open the door to enter. If a bandit wanted to break in, it was not impossible, but it was very difficult. At the moment, Kui Dong's physique was extremely weak, including his soul and body. He was even weaker than an ordinary weak teenager. If he was properly nourished in the future, it was possible for him to recover the strength of a normal person. As for cultivation, it was really up to the heavens. It depended on great opportunities and great luck. However, Kui Dong felt that with what he had encountered along the way, he was already very satisfied to be able to live and be Chen Ping'an's disciple. The 12th level of the scholarly sage fell to the 10th level of cultivation, then to the 5th level, and finally to a mortal who could not fall any further. Kui Dong felt that his life was really full of ups and downs. How dare you threaten me? This guy doesn't learn from his beatings. He's even worse than Li Huai. Li Baoping was so angry that she rushed over, squatted behind him, and quickly stamped the young Kui Dong's head. She was swift and fierce, like a storm. It caught him off guard. Even a person with a strong heart like Kui Dong felt that there was nothing left to live for at this moment. After all, his opponent was just a little girl, not the old scholar or Qi Jingchun. In the mountain river painting, the young man who swung his arm and slashed down lost consciousness when he fell to the ground. He was held in the arms of the tall woman who had recovered her true body. She carefully supported Chen Ping'an to sit on the ground with her hands gently hugging the thin young man. Because the golden knot of hair hung in front of her chest, covering the young man's face, she reached out and threw it behind her back. She lowered her head and stared at the dark face of Chen Ping'an. She suddenly raised her head, looking a little surprised. In the painting that belonged to the sage's forbidden area, an extremely tall golden figure appeared. It stood on the peak of Sui Mountain, as if it was talking to the old scholar. Even the woman who was used to seeing the big world felt that this uninvited guest was not to be underestimated. The old scholar probably did not want their conversation to be leaked, so he cut off the connection. She did not care about it and lowered her head again to look at the sleeping young man. She smiled and said, "If you become a chi cultivator in the future, your skin will turn white. In fact, you will be a handsome young man. You can't be considered handsome, but you can't run away from being upright and smart." On the peak of Sway Mountain, the golden figure that was originally thousands of feet tall shrank to a burly man 10 feet tall after landing on the peak. He was wearing a dignified golden armor. On the surface of the armor were innumerable talisman engravings. Some were ancient talismans that had long been lost, exuding a simple and desolate aura. It was unknown whether they had been passed down for thousands of years, but some were still as new as yesterday, exuding a sacred light. Each talisman was inlaid on the armor. Between the lines, the words were like golden rivers, and the words were like golden mountains. The old scholar felt a little guilty. He shrunk his neck and deliberately looked around. The man's face was covered with armor. He said in a deep voice, "It has been 6,000 years since I became the god of Sway Mountain. This is the first time someone dared to challenge me with a sword. Scholar, don't you have anything to say?" The old scholar was confused. "What are you talking about?" The golden-armored man was well aware of the old elementary scholar's temperament, so he didn't bother to say anything more. He turned to look at Chen Pingan and frowned. "The aura on her body is very mysterious. Who is she? Did she personally chop Sway Mountain?" The old scholar said in a low voice, "I advise you not to provoke her. This old girl's temper is not very good." The man in golden armor said indifferently, "I have a good temper." The old scholar rolled his eyes. "Yes, yes, yes. You all have bad tempers. I have a good temper, okay? You all like to be unreasonable with people who are reasonable. I'm so angry." The man in golden armor seemed to have thought of something. The originally hostile atmosphere suddenly disappeared. The old scholar sighed. "I won't say what happened. Anyway, it has something to do with Xiao Qi. Can you be magnanimous this time?" The man was silent. The old scholar laughed and said, "I'll take it as your acquiescence. Alas, you're a good guy. You're just a little thin-skinned and like to put on airs. What kind of friendship do you think we have? Years ago, we went together to peek at the face of the mountain goddess. Unexpectedly, she was bathing and changing clothes at that time. If I didn't stand up for justice and bear the mountain goddess wrath alone, I would have talked to her for 3 days and 3 nights. In the end, I convinced her with reason and made her let bygones be bygones." The man said in a low voice, "Shut up." The old scholar knew that he had succeeded and stopped pushing his luck. The rules of the mountain goddess of Sway Mountain could be said to be the golden rule. To be able to make this blockhead turn a blind eye to it, the old scholar felt that he was quite powerful. He pointed to the distance and said, "Oh right, do you see that? That young man is the closed-door disciple that Xiao Qi helped me take in. What do you think? Not bad, haha. Anyway, I like him. His temperament is very similar to mine in the past. He likes to reason with people. If he can't be reasoned with, then he will make a move. The way he makes a move is also like Xiao Qi in the past. TSK, TSK. Do you have any wine on you?" The man in golden armor glanced at the young man. "It's not that Qi Jingchun is crazy, it's you who are blind." The old scholar was not angry. He said cheerfully, "You uncouth people don't know anything about the affairs of scholars." The man in golden armor could be considered to be one of the 5 great mountain gods with the highest status and power in this vast world. However, the stronger one was, the easier it would be for things to go according to one's wishes. This was because for gods with extraordinary fighting power and status, especially when they were not affected by the burning of incense, the more restrictions they would be subjected to in the vast world. There was a time when the old scholar was in charge of keeping an eye on the 5 great mountains within Sway Mountain before the statues were placed in the temple. This could be said to be a cold bench in the government office. Sometimes, it could also be said to be an extraordinary feat. For example, One of the three most famous moves of the old scholar was to use the natal character to suppress the entire 5 great mountains, causing most of them to sink into the ground. The golden body of the 5 great mountain gods, who had great backing, was crushed on the spot. The second disciple of the ancestral lord was furious because of this. He almost broke through the sky and forced his way into the vast world from the outland. During that trip to the sky, the scholar was not stingy at all. Could this be considered a good temper? If he was really a good-tempered teacher, how could he teach disciples like Qi Jing-chun, the one surnamed Zhuo, and Kui Dong? One could establish a sect and proclaim himself as the ancestral lord, one could betray the orthodoxy, and one could betray the ancestral lord. The deity in golden armor suddenly asked, for the sake of Qi Jing-chun, who was bound to die, you broke your oath and left the forest of merits. You even gave up the great path. What are you after? A wise man broke the rules, and a gentleman went against the rules. Both of them had their own tragic ending. In the Confucian orthodoxy, there would naturally be saints and teachers who would teach according to the rules. However, when the saints went against their will, their ending was the most tragic. For the sake of Qi Jing-chun, who was bound to die, the old scholar really put his old life on the line. Almost no one could understand. Knowing that the situation was already decided, it was meaningless to fight based on personal feelings. Therefore, even if the deity in golden armor was used to seeing the changes in the world, he still felt that it was unbelievable. The old scholar touched his head and smoothed his hair. He smiled and said, I once asked Qi Jing-chun to answer a question. Since Qi Jing-chun gave his answer, as a teacher, of course, I can't be worse than my disciple. The great god in Suishan sneered, don't talk to me like this. The student surpasses the master, isn't that what you said? Since the disciple is not inferior to the teacher, your words don't make sense. The old scholar reached out and pointed at the deity in golden armor, you're just a bookworm. It's better to have no books than to believe in books. Do you understand? The deity in golden armor laughed angrily, I'm too lazy to talk nonsense with you. I'm leaving. Take care of yourself. He hesitated for a moment, if you really can't do it, come to Suishan. The old scholar waved his hand and said, Suishan is a place where even taking a dump is blasphemous. I won't go. Besides, now that I've lost the opportunity to prove my Tao, I don't have the ability I had before. But if anyone wants to deal with me, hey, just bring it on. It's a pity. If I had such an opportunity back then, when I met that ox nose number 2, I would have hugged his leg and chopped off my head. If I didn't, I wouldn't have let him go. I wouldn't have been so scared afterward. The deity in golden armor shook his head. He really didn't have the mood to talk. He didn't want to talk about the past with this scholar. Anyway, since he knew the old scholar, he felt that every time he met this guy, he would be disappointed. But after every disappointment, he couldn't help but look forward to the next meeting. How strange. The old scholar suddenly shouted, Don't go, don't go. I have something to ask of you. It's just a small matter. Don't be afraid. The deity in golden armor didn't say anything. A golden light rose from the ground and was about to leave this place. But in the next moment, he returned to his original form and hovered in the air. It turned out that the old scholar had shamelessly reached out and grabbed his ankle, hanging in the air with him. He had no choice but to land back on the ground. He looked at the old scholar who was laughing and clapping his hands and said angrily, How humiliating. If you have something to say, say it. The old scholar rubbed his hands, Didn't I just take in a closed-door disciple? The first impression I gave him was probably not too good. I wanted to make up for it, so I gave him a gift. After all, it's going to be goodbye soon. I really didn't have the chance to teach him. I feel guilty. The deity in golden armor sneered, Help you prepare a gift. Sure, that's easy. I have a Zhonyu sword that has lost its sword spirit. Do you want to give it to your disciple? Is it enough? The old scholar blushed with an insincere look. How can I do that? The gift is too expensive, how can I accept it? Of course, it's still a token of appreciation from you as an elder. If you insist on forcing it on me, I can ask Chen Pinggan to wait 100 years before taking it back. Who knows, maybe he'll be able to raise it by then, The deity in golden armor took a deep breath. Those who were familiar with him knew that this was a sign that he was about to make a move. The old scholar immediately said in a serious tone, "How can you spoil it through excessive enthusiasm? You really have the heart. Don't you know that more haste makes less speed? This little disciple of mine is going to travel and study with a sword. You can just give him an ownerless sword embryo. But I want something that can be used. It can't be something that only cultivators of the 10th realm have the right to touch. How about it? As an elder, what do you think?" The deity in golden armor sneered, "If I don't give it to you, are you not going to let me go?" The old scholar silently moved closer to the deity in golden armor. He grabbed his arm and said righteously, "How can that be? Am I that kind of person?" Swaishan Guru shook his head helplessly. "For these disciples, you really don't care about your life or your face." "Fine, fine, fine. I'll take it." With a flick of his wrist, a fist-sized silver object floated in front of the two of them. The old scholar's face turned serious. He didn't rush to take it and asked, "Do you have a motive for coming here? Otherwise, why would you casually bring this thing with you? Although it's not an exaggerated treasure, it means a lot to you. If you don't tell me clearly, I won't accept it." The deity in golden armor crossed his arms and looked to the south. "How do you think I followed the clues here?" The old scholar frowned. "Wasn't it because your cultivation is high and you're connected to Suaishan's fate? That's why I made a big commotion here and revealed a flaw that you could take advantage of." The deity in golden armor turned his head and asked, "Do you really not know, or are you playing dumb?" The old scholar was puzzled. "Since when did you learn to keep people in suspense? Although my fake Suaishan was split open by a sword, it won't have any substantial effect on your side." The ferocious deity in golden armor finally couldn't help but curse, "Mother f***ka. That sword directly chopped down on my Suaishan. Now you're pretending that nothing happened?" Although to outsiders, when that sword appeared, it was already at the end of its flight, but my Suaishan has a mountain-protecting formation. How many people in the world can break into the formation with just one sword? Right now, the entire Earth Divine continent is abuzz with discussion, guessing whether it's your so-called Ox-Nose number 2 side hinting at something, or whether those old bastards from the Great Wall of Sword Chi have come to seek justice. The old scholar was dumbfounded. So fierce? These words poured salt on the wound of the deity in golden armor. Scram! He was so angry that he swept his arm and directly smashed the body of the old scholar hundreds of miles away, landing heavily in the river behind Suaishan. He snorted coldly and slapped the inconspicuous piece of silver with his palm, flying towards the place where the old scholar fell into the water. Then, a golden light as thick as a mountain broke through the sky of the mountain and river painting, returning to Suaishan in the Earth Divine continent. In the river behind Suaishan, the old scholar leisurely dog-paddled his way back to the shore. With a shake of his shoulders, the soaked scholar's robe instantly dried and refreshed. He opened his palm and looked at the silver ingot, frowning. "It's hot." When it came to opportunities, whether it was given by a teacher to a student or a master to a disciple, it was all about progressing step by step. It was never better to give something as big as possible, but it was better to give something that one could hold, carry, and eat. Otherwise, those 1,000-year-old tycoons of the mountain immortals, who had accumulated so much wealth and passed it down from generation to generation, would throw an unparalleled divine weapon to their son who had just become a chi cultivator today. Tomorrow, their grandson, who had a good foundation, would give him a magical weapon that could easily break mountains and massacre cities. In this way, they would have long rebelled. Why should the vast world listen to the rules of the academies? Furthermore, karma was the most annoying. It was very troublesome. That was why the old scholar had secretly taken away the jade hairpin. In fact, Alliance had not seen through its true nature. Naturally, the old scholar had given it to Qi Jingchun with a deep meaning. It was to deal with the worst outcome. If Qi Jingchun really made enemies from all sides one day, at least he would have a place to stay. It was a pity that Qi Jingchun had chosen not to use it in the end. Besides not wanting to implicate his teacher, the old scholar, in the meritorious forest, it was probably also one of the backup plans to protect Chen Pingan. It forced the old scholar to personally make a trip to the Aquarius continent to meet the little junior that Qi Jingchun had helped his teacher to accept. At that time, Qi Jingchun had already died. Even if his teacher had come from afar and was not satisfied with this closed-door disciple, for the sake of Qi Jingchun's face, with the old scholar's temperament, most likely he would have pinched his nose and accepted it. In the future, if Chen Pinggan really met a hurdle that he could not cross, even if the old scholar had to imprison himself in the meritorious forest, he would still be able to leave with a few words. However, Qi Jingchun had miscalculated one thing. He did not expect his teacher to leave the meritorious forest so quickly. It was for him. Just like how he had done it for Chen Pinggan. Perhaps this was the true meaning of a kindred spirit. The old scholar took a step forward and came to the top of the mountain. He sighed, "Little Qi, when it comes to protecting people, you are much better than me. Yes, I am very satisfied with this closed-door disciple of Chen Pinggan. After thinking about it, I also thought of something in the meritorious forest. I was lacking such a student." The old scholar's eyes suddenly widened. Where is he? The old scholar was so anxious that he stamped his feet. Suddenly, he calmed down and said with a smirk, "Oh really, this disciple of mine is still young. Oh, he seems to be 14 or 15 years old. He is not young anymore. In many places outside, he is already married and has children." Somewhere in the sky, a woman smiled and said, "Twice." The old scholar pretended to tilt his head and pricked up his ears. What did you say? I can't hear you clearly. Not only am I hard of hearing, but I also can't speak clearly. My words are always misunderstood." No wonder he was able to teach such a big disciple like Dong. After the voice disappeared, the old man turned his head and looked at a huge rock. On top of it were the words "Directly to the heavenly court." The old man retracted his gaze and looked down the mountain. "I still want to see the great rivers and mountains. 1,000 years is too short, 10,000 years is not long." When Chen Pinggan woke up, he found himself once again sitting on the railing of the Golden Arch Bridge. The bridge was still as long as before. He could not see the end and could not see the end. All around him was a sea of clouds, making him feel at a loss. He could not imagine what would happen if he slipped and fell. Would he be smashed to pieces? Would he fall all the way to the endless abyss? Would it be because the journey to the surface was too far? If he did not starve to death, would he have been 15 years old when he fell to his death? In fact, Chen Pinggan had always been thinking about some strange things. It was just that he had never been to school, so he was very unsophisticated. The woman in white sat side by side with Chen Pinggan and said softly, "This used to be a battlefield. When the war ended, only this arch bridge was left. Look over there, there used to be a East Heavenly Gate standing there. It was quite big. At that time, the guy in charge of guarding the gate was a perverted man. He wore a silver armor named Da Shuang. He was not a bad person, but his mouth was a little cheap. My first master fought with his superior and won. At that time, the latter had a few helpers watching from afar. However, no one dared to show up to help." Chen Pinggan followed the direction of her finger and saw an empty space. Occasionally, there would be a flash of colorful light. She said softly, "Now, there is nothing left." Chen Pinggan was a little fascinated and said, "I see." She swayed her feet gently and put her hands on the railing. She smiled and said, "Cultivation, cultivation," and painstakingly built the longevity bridge. It is to build a bridge to stay and not become a speck of dust in the river of time. That is why everyone likes to call themselves upstream. Chen Pinggan nodded. He could understand this sentence. Who would not like to live well? She turned her head and asked with a smile, "Are you tired after such a long journey?" Chen Pinggan thought seriously, "I'm not tired. Compared to when I was young, it was actually easier to collect herbs and burn charcoal in the mountains. It's just that I can't sleep well when I meet too many strange people and things." Chen Pinggan turned his head and smiled happily, "But I slept very well just now. Although I was poor in the small town, I could sleep every day. Now that I am traveling with Bao Ping and the rest, I dare not do so. I am afraid of accidents." She continued to ask, "No complaints?" Chen Pingan thought about it and imitated the fairy sister beside him. He held the railing with both hands and swayed his feet. He looked into the distance and said softly, yes. For example, how can a girl named Zhulu be so unkind? A female ghost in a wedding dress killed many passing scholars just because she felt that the man she loved no longer loved her. If Bao Ping and the rest were not by my side, I would have used a wisp of sword aura to kill her. As for other matters, it's hard to say that I'm complaining. I can't talk about them, but I'm still a little annoyed. For example, Li Huai always doesn't study hard. No matter how I persuade him, he won't listen. I really don't know how Mr. Qi could endure not beating him back then. Also, after eating all the delicious delicacies, these guys don't like the food I cook. I am actually quite depressed. Oil and salt are very expensive. Also, when I go fishing by the river, I can't pick the right time and often can't catch many fish. Every time I go back and see their faces full of disappointment, I feel very wronged. If it wasn't for the fact that I don't want to delay your journey, give me a day or two to build a nest and stay up at night to catch fish. I can catch any fish no matter how big it is. The most recent one was when Lin Shuyi was angry. Actually, I felt very guilty. Although I mainly did it for his sake, I also had selfish motives. Because someone told me that the longevity bridge was broken, and that I might not be able to cultivate in this lifetime. But I didn't want to give up just like that. Firstly, I promised you that I would become an immortal who could fly around in the future. Secondly, I also envied a Liang and the others. Just like Li Huai said, flying around on a sword, whooshing, 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 whooshing. The tall woman quietly listened to the youth's thoughts and joked, "Oh, you also know how to think for yourself." The youth squinted his eyes and tried his best to look into the distance. He smiled and said, "Of course. After my parents passed away, I have always been thinking for myself. It's difficult to think for others. Actually, after meeting you guys, I became like this. I fought with people, bought mountains and shops, learned how to read and write, made small bookcases, practiced martial arts, spent money to buy books, chose routes, sharpened knives and fed horses. I am very busy every day, but I don't regret it. I am very happy." Chen Pingan muttered, "I do miss them. I wonder if they are doing well." She also sighed with emotion at the youth's words. "I see." Chen Pingan suddenly turned his head and said in a low voice, "Fairy sister, I am rich now. Very rich." She couldn't help but laugh. But when she remembered the youth's growth, she quickly felt relieved. Just putting up the Spring Festival couplets on New Year's Eve was such a big matter. If the youth could talk about it for so many years, then having money was of course a happy thing. The youth's eyes suddenly became firm and said, "Fairy sister, don't worry. I will do my best to do what I promised you." She turned her body sideways and reached out her hand to place it on the youth's head. She said gently, "I am already very happy to be able to meet you." She seemed to feel that it was not enough. She simply bent over and pressed her forehead against the youth's forehead. The simple youth was just naturally shy. He wanted to scratch his head but didn't dare to. She smiled and stopped her posture. In the end, the sword spirit and the youth were barefooted and the other was wearing straw sandals. They looked into the distance together and shook their legs. Time passed, but they were unaware of it. If today was a crossing point in the river of time and went against the flow for 20,000 years, the sword spirit's killing power and murderous aura would be unrivaled. 153. With a tap of his toes, the old scholar traversed 800 miles of mountains and rivers in a single step and landed at the place where Chen Pingan had handed over the sword. He began to walk slowly, raising his arm and bending his fingers. He seemed to be knocking on a door, but there was no response. The old scholar retracted his hand and said helplessly, "You're not particular. This kind of behavior is no different from setting up a tent in someone's house. Forget it, I'll just wait." The old scholar began to patiently wait for the sword spirit to appear. After a long wait, the old man stood in the same place, thinking about a difficult problem. He didn't seem anxious at all. A slight ripple appeared in the air. The tall woman grabbed Chen Pingan's shoulder and stepped out of the ethereal void. The old scholar came to his senses and his first words were, "I admit defeat. I don't want to fight anymore. Anyway, it doesn't matter whether the other two swords are used or not, right?" The sword spirit smiled faintly. "Then what about your two provocations?" The old man laughed. "You can't do the same thing 3 times. She raised her eyes and looked in the direction of Sway Mountain. "Is it the new great god of Sway Mountain? How long has he held this position?" The old scholar replied, 6,000 years exactly. "More than 3,000 years ago, when you sang and I appeared on the scene, chaos ensued and the East Peak, Mount Sway, went through 3 masters. During the most chaotic time, what was once regarded as the orthodoxy of the Devil sect was directly taken over. It was truly a chaotic situation where etiquette collapsed. The current great god of Sway Mountain was able to hold his position for 6,000 years. Although luck played a part, it was more because of his terrifying combat power. His fists were hard enough and he had nothing to lose. Who wouldn't be afraid of him?" The sword spirit sneered. "Etiquette collapsed. Was it because the 3 sects didn't divide the spoils equally? Or was there a confrontation between good and evil within the great heaven? What about the Sage of Rights? Given his temper, how could he just stand by and watch?" The old scholar sighed. "It's a long story. Let's not talk about it." The tall woman put her hands behind her back and looked even more disdainful. "The general situation has been decided. Naturally, there would be internal strife. Haha, what a great battle of the great Tao, 100 schools of thought contending. It was lively, but what happened in the end? Has the world really changed for the better?" The old scholar glanced at the white-robed sword spirit and said in an extremely unyielding and straightforward manner, "Of course, the Confucian orthodoxy is not completely clean. Not everyone is a benevolent gentleman. However, the sages of the Confucian school have put in a lot of effort into this. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they worked their hearts out. Therefore, it has always been pure and honest. You can't just deny it." The sword spirit playfully asked, "Does this count as the 3rd time?" The previously frivolous old elementary scholar did not back down in the slightest. He calmly said, "On this matter, if you feel that it is wrong, I can talk to you for 100 or 1,000 years. You can use your sword to talk about your reasoning." She carefully sized up the thin old man who was not very tall. "Did you really disperse all the saints' providence and leave only your soul behind to use this world as a parasite?" The old scholar was silent for a moment. "Yes." She put away the killing intent that had sprung up spontaneously, and a complicated look appeared in her eyes. "After so many years, only the 2 of you have done it. But I'm very curious, do you admire that guy's choice? Or do you have no other choice? The possibility of the former is very small. Since it involves your great Tao, I think the old man in the Confucian orthodoxy will not let you succeed even if it is not a beautiful task." The old scholar calmly said, "It is natural to follow the example of a worthy person." She thought for a moment and turned to look at Chen Pinggan. She smiled and said, "Not only have you achieved your goal, but it has also far exceeded my expectations. Since you have made this choice, and of course, the most important thing is for my master's sake, why don't you leave the remaining 2 swords? If one day I suddenly find you unpleasing to the eye, I will settle the old and new scores together." The old scholar who had been tense all this time suddenly broke his mask and slapped his thigh. He smiled and said, "Leave it, leave it. It is good to leave it. On New Year's Eve, people like to leave some food in their bowls and deliberately leave it for next year. It is a good omen and has a good meaning." No matter how one looked at it, the old man looked like he had just survived a disaster. The sword spirit did not care about this and coldly said, "Open the door." The old man flicked his sleeves and took the lead in striding out. He said loudly, "Laugh to the sky and go out." Chen Pinggan remembered something and asked in a low voice, "Was my sword very bad?" That mountain did not seem to have moved at all. The old senior said that the quality of one's talent in swordsmanship depends on how many words one can receive. Although I did not want to accept them, they also did not want to get close to me. Does this mean that my talent in swordsmanship is as ordinary as that in boxing? The more Chen Pinggan spoke, the sadder he became. The old senior also said that if I were to be a burden, even if I had a cultivation of the 10th level, that sword strike would only have the effect of the 7th or 8th level. Bold words could be said as soon as one opened their mouth, but the difficult things in the world were difficult because they needed to be done step by step. Chen Pingan, a bumpkin from Clay Bottle Alley, understood this principle all too well. The sword spirit reached out and pinched the young man's cheek. He smiled and said, "You will know in the future." Chen Pingan's face flushed red. He wanted to say something but stopped. She already had a tacit understanding with the young man. She took the young man's hand and slowly walked towards the door of the mountain and river painting. She said softly, "Master, I know. In the future, in front of a certain girl, I will definitely not be so impudent. Otherwise, she will wrongly accuse you and think you are a wastrel who changes his mind." The young man smiled brightly. He was relaxed as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders, but also happy to have become friends with her. The tall woman suddenly turned her head and said with some bitterness, "But aren't you afraid that the fairy sister will feel wronged?" The young man thought for a moment and said seriously, "I will say sorry to you. But some things, I feel that it should be like that." Her face was full of worry and she looked as if she was about to cry. Although Chen Pingan was a little helpless, his eyes were firm. He pursed his lips tightly and was unwilling to change his mind because of this. The sword spirit suddenly laughed heartily and gave the young man a thumbs up. He praised, "Handsome." Chen Pingan asked shyly, "Are you really not angry?" She held the young man's hand and stopped walking. Standing at the door, she suddenly bent down and hugged the young man. Her face was filled with a warm smile, like a guy who liked to sleep in. Hiding in a warm bed in the middle of winter and sleeping soundly, that kind of blissful feeling was really indescribable. She didn't care about how Chen Pingan felt. She said cheerfully, "Oh, my little Pingan, you are so cute." The young man instantly felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He was motionless and his mind was blank. He didn't think of anything. Fairy sister. Fairy was just his first impression. In fact, sister was what Chen Pingan felt at the bottom of his heart. She finally let go of Chen Pingan. She stood up straight and turned her head to look. There was an old man who appeared and disappeared mysteriously. With his back to them, he coughed and said, "Don't look at indecent things. Don't worry, I didn't see or hear anything. I just forgot something and had to go back to get it." The tall woman who was in a good mood was too lazy to care about this. Etiquette, morality, karma, these things, which were vast, high, and far away, had never bound her. On the road, there was once a person who had nothing but a sword and walked straight. If there was something in the way, he would open the way with a sword. If there was injustice, he would settle it with a sword. After being silent for 10,000 years, she finally found another person. The two of them were worlds apart. But she didn't feel disappointed. In the beginning, she chose to believe in a slim chance because she believed in Qi Jingchun. She gambled on a very small what-if. But now, even if Qi Jingchun came back to life and said that he was wrong and that she shouldn't have chosen that young man, she wouldn't listen to him no matter what he said. She let go of her hand and motioned for Chen Pingan to go first. The young man took the lead and walked out of the door. The sword spirit looked at the young man's weak shoulder and followed closely behind. Everyone had a state of mind. Qi cultivators called it the elixir chamber, and the secular world called it the heart. The heart lake was just one of them. At that time, she stood on the young man's heart lake and looked around. It was a vast expanse of white and clean. Then, she saw a scene that wasn't so monotonous. She found the heart mirror that the young man himself didn't realize. It was a lonely child of 4 or 5 years old. He was curled up on the ground with his hands hugging his knees. He was alone with a pair of small straw sandals by his feet. He often sat like this in a daze. Beside the child was a small grave without a tombstone. Near the small grave, there were 2 small mounds that were smaller than the small grave. They were like mountains. Every time the child rested enough, he would put on his straw sandals and run to a faraway place to move a small hill back to the grave. It was very strenuous and he could only move it a short distance each time. When he ran to move the hill, The child tied a small seal around his waist and wore a small bamboo hat. The small seal would sway with the child's footsteps. The strange thing was that it didn't look like the heart mirror of the ancestral house in Mud Bottle Alley. Perhaps in the child's heart, his home was gone after his parents died, so he insisted on guarding that small grave. The child's face was stubborn. He habitually frowned and pursed his lips. But occasionally, the child would smile. It should be something really worth being happy about. For example, he quietly told the small grave. His lips moved slightly, but no voice sounded in his mind. But the sword spirit, who was connected to his heart, naturally knew the content of the soundless words. Mother, I know a fairy sister. When she smiles, she looks like you. Other than moving the mountain to go home, the child would almost never leave the vicinity of the small grave. From time to time, he would hold hands and walk a distance to the south, as if he was holding the little hand of a little girl. However, after walking a distance, the child would still secretly look at the grave, seemingly reluctant to part with it. But there was only one situation where the child would run far away. He kept his small head high and looked at the sky attentively, as if he was chasing someone in the sky. In the landscape painting, the old scholar looked solemn. The student surpasses the master. There may be a chance. The old man nodded and said, "Good." The old man was silent for a long time. He found that the whole world began to tremble slightly. He said helplessly, "You are so patient with that kid. Can't you be a little more patient with me?" "Oh, right. You actually know how to smile now. If the rumors passed down from ancient sword immortals are true, wouldn't the eyes of those big shots who were chopped half to death by you back then pop out if they saw you with their own eyes?" The old scholar looked at the sky of this small world, as if his line of sight had passed through the layers of the sky. He suddenly said self-deprecatingly, "Heaven is vigorous, and a gentleman must constantly strive for self-improvement. What you said is so good that it won't be wrong even if thousands of years pass. No wonder our ancestor of the Confucian school wanted to ask you for advice. It seems that we scholars not only learned a little late, but also have a long way to go." 154. When the old scholar walked out of the painting again, he saw Kui Dong still lying on the ground, pretending to be dead. He snorted coldly. What a scandal. Kui Dong stared blankly at the sky. There's nothing to look forward to when I'm alive. So be it if I'm dead. The old scholar walked over and kicked him. Stop pretending to be pitiful. Don't you want to know why little Chi only wanted you to fall in level and not get rid of you? Kui Dong's eyes were absent-minded. He muttered, "When you were kicked out of the Confucian temple, Qi Jing-chun was not implicated by you. Instead, his level continued to rise. This explains a lot. Qi Jing-chun has long been qualified to establish his own school. He has long been separated from your school. Therefore, he feels that he has no right to kill me. He hopes that you will be the one to clean up the school in the future." The old scholar was angry and kicked him again. Measuring the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain is exactly the kind of person you are. I'll count to 3. If you don't get up, you can just lie there and wait for death. Don't expect too much. 3, 2, 2, 2. Kui Dong made up his mind not to get up. The old scholar was so embarrassed that he could only turn around and give Chen Pingan a look to help him out. Chen Pingan nodded and received the scholar tree sword from Li Baoping before walking forward with large strides. After he arrived by Kuisha's side, he spoke the word one with an expressionless face before stabbing down towards the white-clothed young man's neck. The sword was powerful and the tip of the sword was accurate. Chen Pingan himself might not have noticed that after experiencing the state of mind in the painting, his hands were finally able to keep up with Chen Pingan's thoughts. Therefore, this stab was without any smoke or fire. Instead, it became fiercer and fiercer, full of killing intent. Kui Dong was so scared that he scrambled to get up. Chen Pingan put away his sword and nodded to the old scholar, indicating that the old scholar's urgent matter had been taken care of. The old scholar sighed and looked at Chen Pingan and the white-clothed woman not far away. "Let's find a place to talk." The old man turned around and stared at Kui Dong. "Follow me. It's related to your Tao." If you keep pretending, you might as well let Chen Pingan kill you. The group walked to the courtyard. The old scholar looked around and glanced at the small sky screen supported by the snow-white lotus leaf. He made a gesture with his fingers and hesitated for a moment. Let's find a room to talk. Chen Pingan, is there a suitable place where we can talk? It doesn't matter if there are chairs or chairs. Chen Pingan glanced at Lin Shuyi's room. The lights were already out. Perhaps Lin Shuyi had been cultivating in the pavilion for too long and was exhausted. He had to give up the largest room. He nodded to the old man. Let's go to my room. There's only a child called Li Huai sleeping. It won't be a problem to wake him up. Lin Shuyi is a cultivator and should have a lot of things to pay attention to. Let's not disturb him. The sword spirit sat on a stone bench in the courtyard and smiled. You guys talk. I don't like to listen to that. In the end, the old scholar, Chen Pingan, the young Kui Dong, and Li Baoping sat on 4 stools around the table. Li Huai was lying on the bed and sleeping soundly. He was a child with bad sleeping habits. He was sleeping sideways with his head hanging over the edge of the bed, but he could still sleep soundly. Chen Pingan skillfully straightened his body and placed Li Huai's hands and feet into the quilt. He gently cushioned the corners of the quilt on his left, right, and feet so that the heat in the quilt would not dissipate. In the end, Li Huai looked like a wrapped dumpling. After Chen Pingan finished doing all these things, he sat back on the stool. Li Baoping asked in a low voice, "Young martial uncle, do you help me pad the corners of the quilt every night?" Chen Pingan smiled. You don't have to. You sleep much better than Li Huai. You fall asleep as soon as you lie down. Once you fall asleep, you can sleep without moving until dawn. Li Baoping sighed and hit her palm with her fist. She said regretfully, if I had known, I would have had bad sleeping habits since I was young. It's all my big brother's fault. He lied to me that I would have good dreams if I slept well. Chen Pingan smiled. When I go back to my hometown, I'll have to thank your big brother. Along the way, Li Baoping talked about her big brother the most. Therefore, Chen Pingan had a good impression of this scholar who liked to hide in the study room and read. The old scholar looked at the little girl and asked with a smile, "Is your big brother Li Shishing who lives on Fulu Street?" Li Baoping nodded and asked curiously, "What's wrong?" The old scholar chuckled and said, "This name is a bit too big." When Kui Dong heard this, he couldn't help but roll his eyes. Li Baoping was a bit worried. Is it not good to have such a big name? The old scholar was even more amused. He shook his head and said, "If it's big, it's good as long as you can suppress it." Li Baoping was a little girl who liked to drill into a bull's horn. "Sir, how can it be considered as suppressing it?" Kui Dong rolled his eyes again. "It's over." This was exactly what he wanted. The old man who liked to teach others would definitely start to teach them. Sure enough, the old man looked around and didn't see any snacks that could go with the wine. He was a bit regretful and slowly said, "His nature is pure and kind, his knowledge is great, and his morals are high. Even if he travels thousands of miles, he can still suppress it." The little girl put the seal on the table. She shook her body and kicked off her straw shoes. She sat cross-legged on the chair and crossed her arms. She frowned and said, "But my big brother is not as great as you say. Why don't I send a letter home and ask him to change his name?" Kui Dong couldn't help but remind her, "Old man, can we talk about business?" Dao, Dao. Li Baoping silently picked up the seal and blew at the 4 seal characters on the bottom of the seal. Kui Dong quickly shut his mouth. Even if the old man's cultivation was exceedingly high, he was still someone who liked to reason. Being thick-skinned and shameless would work. However, Chen Pingan and Li Baoping were the 2 people Qi Jingchun had chosen. One was a bumpkin who had never read a book, while the other was a scholar who had gone astray. Kui Dong was now like a dragon in shallow water being played by a fish. Facing these 2 people, no matter how heroic Kui Dong was, it was useless. There was no other result other than being beaten and humiliated. The more stubborn one was, the more suffering he would suffer. The old man produced a pot of wine and raised his head to take a sip. He glanced at the seal that the little girl put back on the table and felt a bit sad. Dong was actually very strange tonight. Although there were times when the old man revealed his true feelings, most of the time, he was an old-fashioned and pedantic guy. No matter where he sat, he was like a golden statue sitting on the altar. Especially during the time when learning was most respected by the court and the public. Every time the old man gave a lecture on the difficult classics, there would be more than 1,000 students sitting below and listening attentively. Emperors, kings, generals, ministers, immortals on the mountain, gentlemen, and sages. Even Dong, who had betrayed his teacher, would not deny that the old man at that time was really dazzling. He was like the sun and the moon hanging in the sky, his brilliance not distinguishing between day and night, making the whole galaxy lose its color. But now, he even kicked him twice. When talking about Tao, he even drank wine. Dong seemed to be indifferent, but in fact, his heart was heavy. After all, Dong's feelings toward the old man beside him were very complicated. He admired and hated him, feared and cherished him. He, Dong, was the first disciple of the sage of literature in the past. How could he not feel angry and sad about his teacher's misfortune? On the other side of the bed, Li Huai was talking in his sleep. Alliance, I want to eat meat. Stingy Alliance, just let me have a sip of the wine in your little gourd. Li Baoping's eyes lit up. Li Huai's embarrassing incident could be the topic of conversation for several days. Dong heard Alliance call him and secretly glanced at the old man. The old scholar coughed and looked at the three people sitting in the room. Okay, let's get to the point. Chen Pinggan, Li Baoping, you should already know that I am Qi Jingquan's teacher. Dong was my first disciple and Qi Jingquan's senior martial brother. At that time, I was busy with my studies, so Qi Jingquan's reading and playing chess were indeed taught by my first disciple, Dong. In the end, Dong betrayed his teacher and committed all kinds of shady deeds. When Qi Jingquan died in Liju Cave Heaven, Dong could be considered as the player in the chess game. It would not be excessive to say that Dong was the murderer of his junior martial brother Qi Jingquan. As one of my in-name disciples, Ma Zhon was also the same. However, Ma Zhon was not the player, but he was the mastermind behind the scenes. In the chess game, he was the first to make a move. Before I came to your hometown, this body was just Dong's temporary residence. The real Dong was the imperial tutor of your Dali dynasty. He was an old guy who did not look younger than me. Li Baoping's face was full of anger and her eyes were red. She stared at Dong. On the other hand, Chen Pinggan made Dong tremble with fear. His eyes were lowered and his expression could not be seen clearly. A wild dog that bites does not show its teeth. Dong was too familiar with Chen Pinggan's character. After all, he paid more attention to the growth of the boy in Mud Bottle Alley than old Yang. Dong tried to keep calm, but in his heart he said, I'm dead. Old man, you've done me a lot of harm. The old scholar changed the topic and looked at Chen Pinggan. There's something I want to tell you first. If you agree, I'll do it. I want to take a part of the time stream from you. Don't worry, it won't involve too much of your privacy. It will be the beginning of tonight's chat. Are you willing? Chen Pinggan nodded and said, yes. The old scholar stretched out a palm and pointed it at Chen Pinggan who was sitting opposite him. He shook his wrist and rolled up his sleeves. Soon, strands of water mist appeared around Chen Pinggan and slowly flowed into the old man's palm. Finally, it turned into a crystal clear green water ball. The old man turned his palm over and gently touched the water ball with his palm facing down. The water flowed down to the table and a lively picture appeared on the table. Li Baoping's eyes widened and her face was full of shock. She quickly leaned on the table and said, Wow, junior uncle, this is the mountain road where we met the wedding dress ghost. I'm here too. Haha, my little box is the most beautiful. It's better than Lin Shuyi's and Li Huai's. They look so stupid when they carry their boxes. The wedding dress ghost appeared on the muddy road with an oil paper umbrella. The lanterns lit up one after another and a magnificent fire dragon appeared in the mountains. When Lin Shuyi took out the talisman, they still went around in circles. Not only did they not leave the territory of the female ghost, but they were also abducted to the mansion where the words Xiu Shui Gao Feng were hung. In the end, Wei Jin, the sword whiz of the Wind Snow Temple, broke all the rules with a single sword. He broke the deadlock and successfully took the group out of there. The old scholar grabbed the table and the stream of time gathered into a ball again. He pushed it toward Chen Pinggan and it dissipated back into the world. This was a supreme heavenly magic that involved the origin of the great Tao. It did not rely on the small world of the saints or the mysterious magic weapons. Li Baoping only felt that it was magical and interesting. Kui Dong, on the other hand, knew what was going on. He was even more surprised. What was going on with the old man? His cultivation as a sage was obviously gone. How could he still be so powerful? The old scholar said softly, "Is this female ghost hateful?" "Of course, she is hateful. She killed innocent people and committed many crimes." "Is she pitiful?" "But she is also somewhat pitiful. As a ghost, she was originally kind in nature. In the imperial court, she not only stabilized the fate, but also did a lot of good deeds in other places. She was also in love with the scholars. It should have been a beautiful story. But in the end, both of them were reduced to such a situation. They were hated by gods and hated by ghosts. Both of them were ostracized by the great Tao. They were entangled with karma and dragged through mud and water." The old scholar sighed. "So, a hateful person must have a pitiful side. Is that right?" Kui Dong felt like he was facing a formidable enemy. He did not dare to nod or shake his head. Li Baoping quickly entered the mode of going up the mountain to kill the tiger blocking the road. After thinking carefully for a moment, she said, "Hateful is more." The old scholar nodded and smiled at the little girl. "So hateful and pitiful. How much more hateful is it? How much more is pitiful?" The little girl thought carefully again. "It's reasonable and legal. Let's go back and calculate it carefully." The old scholar smiled and asked again, "Li Baoping, it's legal and legal. Of course, it's not bad. But here comes the question. How do you determine whether the laws in the world are good or evil?" The little girl was stunned. It seemed that she had never faced this question before. She was not afraid and said to the old scholar, "Sir, please wait for a moment. This question is the same as the one youngest uncle asked last time. It's still a bit big. I have to think carefully." The old scholar smiled kindly and nodded his head. "Good." Kui Dong looked at the old scholar's familiar smile and then at the little girl who was concentrating with a straight face. He snorted coldly. No wonder he was Qi Jingquan's teacher and Qi Jingquan's proud disciple. They were passed down from generation to generation. Even the atmosphere of teaching was the same. After the old scholar stumped the little girl, he turned his head and looked at Chen Pinggan, who had clear eyes. "In the past, when I was thinking about difficult questions, I liked to think of the worst first. Today is no exception. A hateful person must have a pitiful side." This sentence itself is not too big of a problem. But there are many people in the world who think they are smart. They like to pretend that they are the only one who is sober when everyone else is drunk. They only talk about the pitiful side and deliberately ignore the hateful side. Some people, on the other hand, are purely merciful and compassionate. Plus, they don't do anything to themselves, so they don't feel so much pain. Instead, they like to point fingers and watch with folded arms, asking people to be tolerant. Chen Pinggan, where do you think the root of the problem lies? You should know that many of the people I'm talking about have read books and are quite knowledgeable. Maybe some of them are good at talking. Chen Pinggan, do you have any ideas? Say whatever you want. Say whatever comes to mind. Chen Pinggan wanted to say something but hesitated. In the end, he said, "I don't have anything to say." Kui Dong no longer cared about what Chen Pinggan's answer was. He began to silently deduce why the old man had said all this. The old scholar looked at Li Baoping and Kui Dong to his left and right. He slowly said, "Merit and demerit are determined by the will of the people. Good and evil are determined by the king of hell." "Why do you say this?" "Because everyone's moral cultivation, growth, vision, and experience are all different. The human heart is constantly fluctuating. How many people would dare to say that their conscience is the most neutral and peaceful? Therefore, the school of legalism took a shortcut and lowered morality and etiquette to the lowest line. Here, it can only be so high. It can't be any lower. At this point, the old man stretched out a hand and drew a line under the table. Of course, these laws, as I said before, have the possibility of being evil. Here, I won't make any derivations. Otherwise, it would be difficult to finish explaining in 3 days and 3 nights. Therefore, in the end, laws are dead, but the human heart is alive. If no one executes the laws, they are dead. Therefore, we still have to seek answers from above. At this point, the old scholar stretched out his hand and pointed at the roof. The old man turned to look at Kui Dong. Do you know why I answered your question so quickly? He touched on a sore spot. Kui Sha said angrily, because you like and think highly of Qi Jing Chun more. You think that my knowledge is all waste paper in the garbage bin. Even if you, the sage of literature, find it dirty your hands when you spread it out. The old man shook his head. Because before you, I had already pondered over your question for many years. At the time, no matter how much I deduced, there was only one conclusion: 1,000-mile dike can be destroyed by an ant's nest. In the end, there was no way to stop it. Because not only did you treat the symptoms, but you didn't solve the root of the problem. Moreover, if your foundation wasn't solid enough, this kind of knowledge with good intentions would have a big problem. It's like a skyscraper. The taller you build it, the more beautiful it is. Once the foundation is unstable, it will collapse with a gust of wind, causing more harm than good. Kui Dong was stunned, but he was still somewhat unconvinced. The old man sighed and said helplessly, "You must know that our Confucian orthodoxy is not perfect. There are so many rules, and as the world moves on, they can't be fixed once and for all. This is normal. If the earliest people speak the most correct and best, what about the later generations? What is the purpose of learning? The method given by the Holy Master is the most general and the most honest. Therefore, it is gentle and beneficial. It is a nourishment that has 100 benefits and no harm. But the premise of this nourishment is that everyone eats the food of the Confucians, right? But sometimes, just like a person, with the decline of the body's functions, or because of the wind and sun, there will be times when one gets sick. The tonic won't have an immediate effect, and it can't save one's life. This requires a tonic. But the use of medicine is 30% poisonous, so you have to be very careful. The ancient saints only dared to say which plants were medicine and which were poison after tasting hundreds of herbs. Kui Dong is so impatient. Are you really willing to spend so much effort? Your younger brother Qi Jing Chun has already reminded you many times that Kui Dong is too smart. His heart is higher than the sky, and he never likes to do martial arts at a low place. How can this be? If you only want to be the mountain lord of the academy and the great chancellor of the academy, then even if the dam is full of holes, when the dam bursts, someone will be able to save you. But once your knowledge becomes mainstream in the Confucian orthodoxy, who will save you if something goes wrong? Me? Or the sage of rites? Or the holy master? Even if these people save you, Kui Dong, how can you be sure that the saints of Buddhism and Taoism won't cause trouble? Won't they turn this vast world into a world where the teachings of their two sects are promoted? Kui Dong was still unwilling to admit defeat. The old scholar was somewhat tired. Although I thought of this earlier than you put your heart and soul into it and thought further than I did. In the end, I was also tempted and thought that I could give it a try. That was why the real battle between the 3rd and 4th places was between the 2 dynasties of the Central Plains. They each promoted rites, music, and rites, and after 60 years, they would see who won and who lost. Of course, the world knows what the outcome was. I lost, so I had no choice but to imprison myself in the forest of merits. Kui Dong's face was full of disbelief. He suddenly stood up. You liar, the old man said indifferently, forgot again? When debating with others, you have to have a neutral attitude. Don't let your emotions affect your decisions. Kui Sha slumped back onto the stool in a daze and muttered, How could you bet on this? How could I lose? The old scholar turned his head to look at the courtyard. Be careful. Don't take it lightly. The tall woman replied lazily, I know. The old scholar took a big gulp of wine and said self-deprecatingly, drinking to drown your sorrows is good. Drinking to strengthen one's courage is even better. The old scholar put down the wine jug and straightened his clothes. He slowly said, the sage of rights wrote 2 words in our righteous world. Qui dong, what do you mean? Qui dong replied without thinking, order. After blurting it out, Qui dong was full of regret. The old man's expression was solemn. He nodded and said, yes, etiquette and rules are order. The second sage of the Confucian orthodoxy, the sage of rights, pursued order. All things in the world are orderly and orderly. These rules were obtained by the sage of rights through untold hardships from the great path, horizontal, vertical, and line by line. Only then did he build what he called a shabby thatched hut to shelter the common people from the wind and rain. The hut is so big that almost everyone, even if they spend their entire life studying it, can't reach the walls. It is so big that no matter how high a cultivator's cultivation is, they can't even touch the roof. So this is the freedom and stability of all living beings. Qui dong sneered, then what about Qi Jing-chun? His knowledge touched the roof. Alliance. His cultivation hit the wall. What should we do now? What should these people do? Why can't these proud sons of heaven walk their own path, open the door that the sage of rights built and go somewhere else to build a brand new hut? At this point, Qui dong subconsciously pointed at the door of the hut. At this moment, the white-clothed youth's face was full of sharpness. From this, it could be seen that Qui dong had involuntarily immersed himself in it. It was even possible that it was not just the young Qui dong's thoughts, but also the most complete subconscious of Qui dong in the depths of his soul. The old man laughed, pursue the absolute freedom in your heart. Sure, but how sure are you that you will walk through the door in the end, and not break the wall with a punch or break the roof? So that the hut that originally sheltered you from the wind and rain and grew to the final height will suddenly become unstable and leaky? Qui dong laughed and said, old man, you said it yourself that it is absolute freedom. Why do you still care about this? How can you decide that the new hut we build after breaking the old hut will not be bigger and more stable than the old one? The old man smiled, oh? Isn't it back to the origin of my great Tao? You, Qui dong, haven't even broken my mold, and you want to break the order of the sage of rights? Qui dong said angrily, how is this the evil of human nature? Old man, you are talking nonsense. The old man said indifferently, don't ask me this question. I will give you a way out. Take this rare opportunity that your soul is intact, and ask your own heart. Qui dong was dumbstruck. In the end, it was as if only the old scholar and Chen Pinggan were left in this world, one old and one young, sitting opposite each other. The old man smiled and said, the sage of rights wants order. Everyone knows the rules, and he hopes that everyone will follow the rules. Later on, the wandering scholars spread knowledge, and when the wandering scholars became aristocratic families, there was the Imperial Teacher Academy. Later on, there was the Imperial Examination, and it was widely accepted. It provided the possibility of a carp jumping through the Dragon's Gate, and the poor no longer had no noble sons. Rules, everything is taken care of. It is hard work, and the more people's hearts waver, and the more thankless it is. Human nature is evil. There are so many people in the world who put down their chopsticks after eating their fill and curse. The old man raised his head and looked at the young man, so now I am looking for a word, order. The old man muttered to himself, I just want to clear up the order of all things in the world. For example, hateful and pitiful. The crux of the problem is that the sage of rights has taught the world enough criteria to judge hateful and pitiful, but the world does not know the order. You don't even know what is hateful, and you run to care about pitiful. How can that be? Am I right? Chen Pinggan nodded. The old man smiled and asked, just by listening to it, isn't the word order far worse than order? Chen Pinggan frowned. The old man burst into laughter. He didn't care how much the young man could figure out. Enjoying himself, he took a sip of wine and said, if these 2 words are placed in the shabby hut of the sage of rights, of course, it can only be regarded as mending. I'm at most a mender of morals and rights. But if these 2 words are placed in a broader place, It will be amazing. Chen Pinggan asked, "Where?" The old man lifted the wine pot and placed it in the center of the table. Then he spread out his palm and wiped the table heavily. It seems that this shabby cottage of the wine pot is just a place to rest on the banks of the river of time. But the old man paused for a moment and smiled. The situation of this river of time depends on the riverbed. Although the two complement each other, at the same time, there is indeed a way to do it. There are many sayings in the world. Go with the flow, so I want to give it a try. Chen Pinggan asked. The Sage of Rights wants people to live safely and steadily within the rules. Sometimes, he has to sacrifice a small number of people's absolute freedom. And old sir, you want everyone to follow your order and walk forward on the great path you have drawn. The old man smiled and added, "Don't think that I am pointing fingers. My order will not go too far. It is just to put in effort at the source of the great path. After that, the water will diverge and enter the sea, or converge midway to become a lake, or continue to flow. It is your own freedom." The old man leaned forward, took out the wine pot, drank a mouthful of wine, and asked with a smile, "Chen Pinggan, what do you think? Are you willing to follow Qi Jingchuan's arrangement and be my disciple?" For the second time, Chen Pinggan looked like he wanted to say something but stopped himself. The old man smiled and was amiable. He repeated again, "Just say what you think. Don't care if it is right or wrong. There are no outsiders here." The young man took a deep breath, straightened his back, and put his fists on his knees. He said seriously, "Because I have not really read books, I don't know what the order of the Sage of Rights is. I can't understand the essence of the order of the old sir." The old man smiled and said, "Go on, just say it boldly." "I have seen very bad people and terrible things in my life. My temper has been tempered very well." Chen Pinggan's eyes became brighter and brighter. "In the small town, I killed Cai Qinqian for myself. I fought with the mountain-moving ape for my friend Liu Xianyang. Later, I promised Mr. Qi to escort Li Baoping and the others to school. Later, I promised the fairy sister that I would become a Qi trainer. I did these things with peace of mind. I just did it without thinking too much." Chen Pinggan continued, "You said a lot before, and I have been listening carefully. After thinking about some of them, I think they are very reasonable. For example, I think the hateful and pitiful part is right. The order can't be wrong. So at that time, I wanted to say that I wanted to kill the wedding dress ghost very much. Now I want to kill her, and I will kill her in the future. I want to tell her that no matter how wronged she is, it is not a reason for her to pass the pain to the innocent. I want to tell her that she has her pitiful parts, but she deserves to die." This young man from Clay Bottle Alley, who had always been gentle, was very sharp at this moment. Chen Pinggan's tone became more and more firm. He said slowly, "But for those things that I can't understand, or even that far away in my life, I will not take them into my own hands. Because if I feel that I can't do it, why should I promise others? Just because I am embarrassed? Because I don't want to disappoint others?" But the answer is very simple. If you promise but don't have the confidence to do it, won't others be even more disappointed if you can't do it in the future? The old scholar stopped smiling and looked serious. After thinking for a moment, he was a little absent-minded. He habitually stretched out 2 fingers, as if he was picking up a peanut from a dish. In the small yard, the tall woman smiled with narrowed eyes. Earlier, she deliberately pretended to be sad. Didn't the young man refuse her with righteous words? If it were Ma Kushuan, Xieshe, or Kaoshi? For a girl who was far away and whom he had known for less than a month, he risked offending a sword spirit who had lived for 10,000 years and whom he would need to rely on in the future. Was this a small matter? It was a small matter. But it was definitely not a small matter. The struggle for the great Tao was endless. There were some details that were too terrifying. This was the most unpredictable and dangerous place. Every time a Qi trainer's cultivation was higher and he was closer to the heavenly screen, the flaw in his state of mind would be infinitely magnified. For example, if the flaw of the Tao ancestor was only the size of a mustard seed, once it became real, it would be bigger than the hole pierced by a sword in the Yellow River heaven. For example, in the seemingly trivial long river of time, If the child in the mud bottle alley chose the free tanghulu under the kind invitation of the stall owner, he took it and ate it happily. Then he jumped back to his ancestral house in the mud bottle alley, ate the tanghulu and threw the bamboo stick away casually. It seemed that nothing had happened. But did nothing really happen? Could the young Chen Pinggan still have today's opportunity? In the room, Chen Pinggan looked at the old man. Even if Mr. Chi wants me to do something, as long as I don't think I can do it, I still won't agree. For example, if I think about something seriously and still feel that it is wrong, even if someone holds a knife to my neck, I will still tell him that no matter who he is, it is wrong. The young man's tone was very calm. Chen Pinggan said in the end, I am not the kind of person who can go far in a field of knowledge. Learning to read and write is a very simple thing for me. It is so that I can write spring festival couplets and post them at the door of my house. In the future, I can write tombstones for my parents. At most, I can read some principles of being a person, but I don't have too many ideas. So, old mister, I will not be your disciple. Kui Dong's face turned pale and he was sweating profusely. Even Li Baoping felt that something was wrong. She sneakily picked up the seal from the table and was about to use it to hit someone. As for whether it was the bad guy Kui Dong or her teacher's teacher, she didn't care. Her youngest uncle was the most important person in the world. The old man only asked pleasantly, "This is what you think now, right? If in the future you feel that you were wrong in the past, will you change your mind and beg me to take you as my disciple?" Chen Pinggan said without hesitation, "Of course. But if you don't want to take me as your disciple, I won't force you. I will probably regret it, but it won't be much." The old man had a strange look on his face. "I am the sage of literature, and I used to be one of the top sages in the Confucian temple. It is a great blessing for me to take you as my closed-door disciple. It is a great opportunity and a great opportunity. If it suddenly falls on your head, shouldn't you hurry up and put it away? If there is a problem, you have your teacher to protect you. What are you afraid of? No matter how you look at it, it is a good thing with no harm." Chen Pinggan suddenly said, "There are some things that go against your heart. Don't take a single step out." The old man sighed. "Since the time is not right, I won't force you." The old man smiled. "I am very disappointed that we can't be master and disciple, but I think Qi Jingchun is not disappointed at all. This Chen Pinggan is very stubborn, just like Qi Jingchun when he was young. I am afraid this is the reason why he was willing to bow to you in the alley." Chen Pinggan was puzzled. The old scholar slowly stood up and looked at the three children. Sitting down and discussing the Tao is a very good thing. The old scholar smiled. But don't forget, it is even more important to start and act. Otherwise, there will be no place for all moral essays. The old elementary scholar suddenly began to enjoy himself and his face lit up with a smile. He put his hands behind his back and walked out of the house while shaking his head. He clicked his tongue and said, Old Mr. sat down and discussed the Tao while the young man walked. Good, good. Li Baoping angrily said, "Only young people, what about me?" The old man opened the door and laughed. Yes, 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 there is also the little girl from the Aquarius continent, Li Baoping. Chen Pinggan thought, sitting down and discussing the Tao, start and act. This principle is very good, I have to remember it. The young man Kui Dong sat in the same place in a daze. Suddenly, he quivered. After coming back to his senses, he suddenly stood up and bowed to Chen Pinggan. "Mr. Chen Pinggan helplessly said, "Why are you still here?" Kui Dong smiled and joked. "Mr. wanted to kill me before, was it because you didn't want to pay me back?" It was a few thousand taels of silver. Chen Pinggan calmly said, "If you were killed by me tonight, as long as I, Chen Pinggan, have money in the future, I will definitely build you a tomb worth 2,000 taels of silver." Kui Dong's face was awkward. In the end, he could only squeeze out a sentence. "I thank you." 155. Li Hui slept in for a long time. He didn't want to get out of bed even when the sun was shining on his butt. The bed was too comfortable, like sleeping in a ball of cotton. The child opened his eyes in a daze and sat up. He looked around and didn't realize what was going on. It took him a while to remember that this wasn't the hard bed at home, nor was it the wilderness. The child's first thought was that it was good to be rich. The second thought was that it was no wonder Chen Pinggan was a moneygrubber. Li Huai actually wanted to go back to sleep, but seeing that Chen Pinggan wasn't by his side and didn't appear in his sight, Li Huai panicked. He nimbly put on his clothes and boots, took the painted puppet from the green bamboo box and rushed out of the house. He saw Lin Shuyi playing chess with a poor old man. Even Li Baoping, who was born without a butt, was sitting on the stone bench, carefully watching the game. Yu Lu and Xie Xie were standing beside Lin Shuyi, helping to make plans. Chen Pinggan sat opposite Li Baoping. When he saw Li Huai, he waved his hand. When the child ran to his side, he gave his seat to Li Huai. Li Huai was just about to sit down when he saw the white-clothed youth standing behind Chen Pinggan staring at him with a fake smile. Li Huai thought for a while and silently put the painted puppet on the stone bench. He didn't dare to sit and only dared to lie on the table with his butt sticking out. The youth with the red mole between his eyebrows, Kui Dong, turned his head to look at Yu Lu and Xie Xie. His gloomy eyes were like a stream, moving between their faces. The young girl was keenly aware of Kui Dong's gaze. She didn't raise her head to look at him, but she was puzzled. Usually, when this Dali imperial tutor's gloomy gaze fell on her, her skin would have goosebumps. But today was different. It was just the gaze of an ordinary teacher. It didn't have the oppressive feeling from before. Was it because of the warm autumn sun? Yu Lu calmly raised his head and smiled at this young master. Kui Dong stretched out his finger and beckoned, Yu Lu, Xie Xie, you two come here. Then he smiled at Chen Pinggan and said, can we talk at the pavilion? There are some things that need to be discussed openly. Chen Pinggan nodded. The four of them went to the pavilion. Before leaving, Chen Pinggan patted the coward Li Huai's head and joked, now we can sit without worry. When they reached the pavilion, Kui Dong glanced at Iron Horse Windchime and said to Yu Lu and Xie Xie, introduce yourselves. There's no need to hide. Don't worry, there's no conspiracy. Even if you don't believe me, you should believe in Chen Pinggan, right? Yu Lu and Xie Xie looked at each other. No one was in a hurry to speak. The tall youth dressed simply, Yu Lu, had been the coachman since he came out of seclusion. He was the one who helped Chen Pinggan the most in the group. Even sewing could be done by the youth with exceptional dexterity. The youth was obsessed with cleanliness. He was passionate about washing clothes and straw sandals. Whenever he saw someone's clothes and straw sandals stained with mud or holes in them while walking on the mountain road, the tall youth would feel uncomfortable. Even when he saw the crooked arrangement of Li Huai's book box, Yu Lu, who happened to be at the side, would have a worried expression. As long as they stopped by a water source, the carriage would be washed clean by the tall youth. To this, even Chen Pinggan felt inferior. How could there be such a restless person in the world? As for the dark-skinned, old-fashioned, and slender girl, Li Baoping, for the first time, had a childish temperament. She hated her bitterly and viewed her as an enemy. Lin Shuyi's impression of her was average. It could not be considered good or bad. At most, they were friends who played a few games in their spare time. Li Huai, on the other hand, was very close to her. The two of them were passionate about arranging troops. Kui Dong said unhappily, you guys can talk freely. I'll clean up later. The handsome youth strode out of the pavilion and walked around. He bent down to pick up small stones on the ground. After picking up a large handful, he sat by the old well in boredom, throwing stones down to listen to the sound of the water. Thinking that he was actually so bored, Kui Dong's eyes blurred. It was as if a lifetime had passed. He looked at the dark well. Now, he could no longer see the scene below with his naked eyes. At this moment, Kui Dong almost wanted to jump into the well and commit suicide. In the pavilion, Yu Lu was the first to speak. I'm the crown prince of the former Lu dynasty. Yu Lu used to hide in the mountain opening team of the remnants of the Lu family. Actually, I have another alias, Yu Shalu. If you read it the other way around, it means that I'm a remnant of the Lu family. Every time someone calls me, it can help me reflect once. What's past is past. The girl was furious. She stood up suddenly and pointed at the tall youth's nose. She scolded angrily, "Past? Your Highness the Crown Prince, it's easy for you to say, as if it's as light as the clouds and as light as the wind. You're even more pure of heart and few desires than the cultivators on our mountain. But the hundreds of lives in my sect, from top to bottom, have been sacrificed for your Lu family and died for the country. How can it be past?" The girl's face was full of tears. She said in a trembling voice, "Touch your conscience. How many Qi cultivators in the world are willing to die for the country? Only us. Since there were states and dynasties in the Eastern Treasure Bottle continent, we're the only ones in history who didn't retreat or surrender. We risked our lives to prove that the Lu family's dynasty is legitimate." Yu Lu looked calm. "Then what do you want me to do? It's true that I'm the crown prince of the Lu family. But my father has always been arbitrary. He's just afraid of those groundless prophecies and folklore. He's worried that the East Palace will be powerful and he'll drive me to the academy in the enemy country, Dali, to study. I've never been in power and I've never had any involvement with the imperial court. I've only focused on studying the sages." "Thank you. Tell me, what do you want me to do?" The girl was provoked by Yu Lu's indifferent attitude. She lost her composure even more. She was so angry that her whole body trembled. She gritted her teeth and said, "My surname is Xie, but my name is not Xie. I'm Xie Ling Yu. I'm the youngest Qi cultivator in the Lu dynasty to break through the bottleneck of the fifth state. I'm a descendant of the Xie family of the wind god. I hate the muddle-headedness and mediocrity of the royal family of the Lu family. But I hate you, the crown prince, even more for going with the flow. You're a servant to the great enemy, the imperial tutor of Dali. Yet you still have the cheek to be content. If the ancestors of the Lu family know of this in the netherworld." Yu Lu's expression was as usual. He still spoke in a calm tone and interrupted the girl's accusation. "If you, Xie Ling Yu, have the backbone of a descendant of the Xie family of the wind god, why don't you go and die? If you feel that suicide is not heroic enough, you can openly assassinate the imperial tutor, Kui Dong, and die a heroic death. How good would that be?" Yu Lu turned to look at the youth in straw sandals who was watching coldly from afar. He smiled and asked, "Chen Pinggan, can I borrow 100 taels of silver from you? So that I can build a big tomb for heroine Xie, fairy Xie, to express my admiration in my heart." Chen Pinggan looked at the tall youth and then at the slender girl. "If you still want to live well, why don't you live well?" Chen Pinggan thought for a moment and continued, "I'm just casually talking about my own feelings. It may not make sense. You just listen to me. If there are some debts that can't be settled for the time being, then let's put it aside first. As long as you don't forget it, there will be a day in the future when you can make it clear and make it clear." Chen Pinggan looked at the two noble descendants of the Lu family. One was the crown prince who almost sat on the dragon throne, and the other was the most talented mountain immortal in the dynasty. Chen Pinggan knew that his reasons for persuasion might not enter their ears at all. This was not strange. Why should they listen to a country bumpkin who grew up in the mud bottle alley? But at this moment, Chen Pinggan looked at the two people who were revealing their true feelings. Xie Ling Yu was no longer so cold and distant and would cry in anger. Yu Lu was no longer so amiable and would use words to stab people. Although Chen Pinggan was not gloating, he did know that at this time, he felt that the two people standing in front of him had some familiar popularity. Therefore, Chen Pinggan, who felt that he was the worst at reasoning, racked his brains and reluctantly added, "You guys are much more knowledgeable than I am. I don't know how you guys think about things. Take me for example. The thing I'm most afraid of is when I have a little bit of ability and can decide the fate of others. I'm especially afraid that the things I think are reasonable are actually not reasonable. Unless it's a last resort, such as a matter of life and death, there's no choice. Then I'll take action when I have to. But under other circumstances, don't just follow your thoughts at the moment and be led by the nose by I think so and so. Alliance said that you should always think of a why for everything. I think he's right. So I want to study and learn how to read. In fact, I know that when I asked for advice from Li Baoping and Lin Shuyi, or when I practiced writing on the ground with Li Huai, You two looked down on me from the bottom of your hearts. I want to read books. I want to learn from books. I want to meet more people. I want to visit more places. I want to be like Ah Liang. He dares to pat his chest and say that he has seen more rivers than you have eaten salt. Only in this way, in the future. I'm just saying that if one day I really have the ability as great as the land sword immortal, Wei Jin of the Wind Snow Temple, then I will use my sword. Whether it's to kill people or to save people, it will be very fast. Or if I'm not good at sword practice and I'm good at fist practice, then when I use my fist. Speaking of this, Chen Ping'an's face was full of radiance, as if he was thinking of his own that day. He would use his sword to his heart's content and use his fist to his heart's content. There was once a man wearing a bamboo hat who always teased Chen Ping'an, "You're a handsome young man. Alas, can't you smile a little every day? It's not good to be so thoughtful." In fact, Chen Ping'an was very depressed every time. He wanted to tell that guy loudly, "I also want to, but I can't do it right now." Yu Lu was still sitting in the same place. Xie sat back in her original position aggressively, but she didn't look like she was going to fight Yu Lu to the death. Yu Lu looked at Chen Ping'an, who was calm, and asked curiously with a smile, "Chen Ping'an, aren't you good at talking? Why don't you talk to Li Baoping and Li Huai about these things?" Chen Ping'an replied, "I'm familiar with them, so I don't need to talk about reasons." What he meant was that he, Chen Ping'an, was not familiar with them, so he needed to talk about these things. Yu Lu was immediately deflated. Xie's face was cold, but the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. She forced that smile to be flattened. Xie carefully glanced at Kui Dong, who was sitting in a daze at the mouth of the well. She hesitated for a moment and said slowly, "I was originally a Qi refinement warrior of the Sea Viewing Realm in the Middle Five Realms. I was half a step away from the Eighth Realm, the Dragon Gate Realm. However, after I was reduced to a remnant, a vicious imperial concubine sent a famous sword cultivator from your Great Li to use a secret technique to pin a few of my acupoints with dragon-trapping nails. As a result, whenever I tried to use my innate energy, I would be in so much pain that I wished I was dead. Furthermore, even if I risked endless troubles, I could only exert the strength of 4th or 5th tier." After Xie finished talking about these important secrets that concerned her fate, she stared at Yu Lu, who was pretending to be mute. The latter asked, "What?" Xie sneered and said, "Don't play dumb here." Chen Ping'an was able to catch fish because of his accumulated experience over a long period of time. He relied on the clumsy bird to fly first. At this point, Xie paused slightly. From the corner of her eyes, she saw that the young man who was stabbed by her was not angry. Instead, he was a little silly. She then heaved a sigh of relief and continued, "But if you, Yu Lu, did not catch those fish because of your martial arts cultivation, I'll change my surname to yours." Yu Lu smiled and said, "Oh, you're talking about this. I thought that none of you would be interested in this little trick. Martial arts and the martial arts world are not worth mentioning. When I was in the East Palace, because of my identity as the Crown Prince, I was destined not to cultivate the art of immortality. Therefore, I could only go and look through the martial arts secret books in the palace. I've said before that my father is afraid of those songs, not a son who has nothing better to do but to familiarize himself with martial arts." Yu Lu stopped smiling and said sincerely, "Moreover, others may not know the situation of the martial arts world and the martial arts world, but you, Xieling, do not know? It's just a pond at the foot of a mountain. No matter how big the fish are, how big can they be? Not to mention other places, just look at our Lu dynasty. There are not many Ninth Realm cultivators, but there are still quite a few. But as for Ninth Realm martial artists, there is not a single one. Therefore, when I first started practicing martial arts, it was purely for fun. You may think that I am just standing there and talking, but I still have to say that in the dull and boring Eastern Palace, if a teacher accidentally farted, it would be a rare thing worth talking about." Xie sneered and said, "Oh? From your tone, your martial arts realm is not low." Yu Lu sighed, his eyes were sincere, he shook his head and said, "It's not high, only the 6th realm." Xie's eyes revealed a trace of shock, her face slightly stiffened. The climbing of the martial arts world was most particular about one step at a time. Usually, it was done with a lot of preparation. Most of them were late bloomers. For example, Dallas vassal Song Jankyung was a freak. Looking at the history of Aquarius continent, it was not an exaggeration to say that it was a once-in-a-century occurrence. So for young high realm cultivators, others would be envious of their talents, opportunities, and so on. They would call them geniuses and then feel that it was right and proper. Because the word genius could explain everything. But martial arts was different. A 14 or 15-year-old 6th realm martial artist. He was a real monster. Don't forget, the Liu dynasty's crown prince Yu Lu lived like a prince in the East Palace. It was very likely that he had never had a life and death battle. Reading a book and seeing a 6th realm martial artist. When Yu Lu saw the girl's eyes and expression, he silently swallowed the words that were at the tip of his tongue back into his stomach. She was about to reach the 7th realm, at most 3 to 5 years. When she thought of being so close to a 6th realm martial artist, the girl felt uncomfortable all over. She felt that Yu Lu would suddenly attack her and then smash her head with a punch. A 6th realm chi refinement warrior could be very weak, but when faced with a pure martial artist of the world, it was best not to have such thoughts. Chen Pinggan stood up and first looked at the tanned girl, saying happily, "Lin Shuyi is also a chi refinement warrior. Miss Xie, although your cultivation is limited now, but your vision is still there. In the future, please talk to him more about cultivation. Yes, Lin Shuyi's personality is a bit cold, you have to be more tolerant. Oh right, Lin Shuyi is amenable to coaxing but not coercion. He is thin-skinned and can't take good persuasion. Miss Xie, try to persuade him more. For example, using chess to chat about cultivation, I think that would be very good." Then Chen Pinggan looked at the tall youth. "Yu Lu, since you are a 6th realm expert, I don't have to worry about tiring you out for trivial things like washing clothes and brushing straw sandals in the future. Just ask, and you will have enough clothes." Finally, Chen Pinggan shouted to Kui Dong in the distance, "I've finished talking with the two of them, you can come back." Yes, in the words of scholars, we had a good chat. Chen Pinggan smiled and left the pavilion. His footsteps were light, clearly he was really happy. In the pavilion, the young boy and girl looked at each other, feeling that something was wrong, but they could not think of a reason. 156. Kui Dong walked back to the pavilion from the old well and stood still outside the pavilion. As the autumn read-in did not want anyone to explore the well without permission, there was only one entrance and exit from the pavilion on the west side. Kui Dong, who was standing on the east side, was a little stunned. In the end, he gritted his teeth, grabbed the railing of the pavilion with both hands, and used all his strength to climb up. He flipped onto the bench in the pavilion and lay on it, gasping for breath. Yu Lu and Xie Xie were a little vigilant. They only thought that Dali Imperial Tutor was playing tricks to have fun, so they had to be careful not to fall into a trap. To put it bluntly, even if Kui Dong handed a knife to the young boy and girl and stood still to let them cut him, the two of them would not dare to make a move. They would not even take the knife. In Xie Xie's opinion, the reason why Chen Pinggan could not care less about Kui Dong was that Chen Pinggan was ignorant because he had never experienced the real scenery on the mountain. He did not know the meaning of the saying of fighting on the battlefield, the struggle in the court, and immortality. In the past, the first disciple of the sage of literature, a chi cultivator at the peak of the 12th state, and the Dali Imperial Tutor. Any one of his identities alone was a towering mountain that could make people breathless. Presently, Kuisha's body was extremely weak as he lay on the bench, and he was exhausted like a dog. He stretched out his hand to wipe off the sweat on his forehead. Just as all of you've seen, not only have I suffered an unexpected calamity that caused me to lose my cultivation and become powerless, it even caused me to be unable to even use my cube space, causing me to become a defenseless pauper. So, if the two of you have a grudge against me, now is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take action. There won't be such a shop after this village. Speaking of this, Kui Dong turned his head to look at the Dali territory thousands of miles away and cursed weakly, "You enjoy the blessings, and I take the blame. Damn you, Dali Imperial Tutor. Oh, you are still my own master," Kui Dong muttered and cursed to himself. No matter what, along the way, although he had not succeeded in apprenticing himself to a master, he had been with Li Huai for a long time. He had indeed become much more fluent in cursing people. Now, he even cursed himself. The young boy and girl were used to the Dali imperial tutor's supernatural behavior. Quisha sat up and leaned against the fence, placing his hands on the railing. Yu Lu and Xie Xie happened to be on his left and right. Kui Dong sighed. You think that Chen Pinggan doesn't know how high the mountains are and how deep the waters are, so you are not afraid of me at all. This is. Kui Dong paused for a moment and laughed. Yes. Kui Dong continued, however, you have only thought of half of it. The ignorant are fearless. However, you can't compare to Chen Pinggan in that a straight foot is not afraid of a crooked shadow. Of the two of you, one is a sixth realm martial artist who came out of nowhere from reading books. His world is shattered and he has to endure humiliation. The other is a chi refinement warrior who is astonishingly talented but bears a blood feud. You always feel that the future is very long. Therefore, Chen Pinggan dares to kill me and he will kill me. What about the two of you? You are hesitating and perturbed. Kui Dong rubbed his waist and said with a frown, actually, my waist hurts a lot. Kui Dong looked at Yu Lu. You will follow me wholeheartedly in the future. How about that? Yu Lu smiled and said, ever since I left the condemned felons, I've been following the Grand Preceptor. It's a good feeling. The journey of learning has been exciting. Compared to pretending to be a nerd in the Eastern Palace, listening to those gossips every day, it's much more interesting. If Lord Imperial Tutor can explain some difficult questions about the classics to me when he is free, I will feel that my life is very complete. Kui Dong stretched out a finger and pointed at the tall teenager. Chen Pinggan is cautious and serious. He is a frog at the bottom of the well who suddenly jumped out of the well. He is afraid of everything that he sees. You, Yu Lu, are really shrewd. You look like a scoundrel. Sometimes, I really want to punch your smiling face. Yu Lu said helplessly, compared to Chen Pinggan, how am I better? Aren't we both frogs at the bottom of the well? Kui Dong said casually, riches and honor burn the body, suffering and suffering cool the body. I will give you this famous saying of the saints for free. Take it and think about it. Yu Lu, who had read thousands of books, asked curiously, which saint of the Confucian temple taught you this? Kui Dong pointed at himself. Me. Yu Lu was even more helpless. Kui Dong took out a stone from his sleeve and gently threw it at the iron horse under the eaves. It missed the first time, the second time, and the third time. Kui Dong glanced at the girl and pursed his lips. If I really want to throw you out, the bell will definitely ring. The girl stood there like a bodhisattva, expressionless. Kui Dong smiled. You, on the other hand, really want to kill me, but you feel that you only have one chance. You must have a foolproof plan. You don't want to die for nothing. Yu Lu, on the other hand, is smarter than you. You feel that it doesn't matter if you kill me or not. Kui Dong sighed. Chen Pinggan, Li Baoping, Li Huai, and Lin Shuyi, 4 people. Yu Lu, in order of your favorability, from good to bad, it should be Lin Shuyi, Li Baoping, Chen Pinggan, and Li Huai. As for Miss Xie, it should be Li Baoping, Li Huai, Chen Pinggan, and Lin Shuyi. Kui Dong pointed at himself with his thumb. As for me, it should be Li Huai, Li Baoping, Lin Shuyi, and Chen Pinggan. I like Li Huai the most because he is the least threatening to me. Li Baoping is such a bright spirit girl. Especially someone like me who is full of evil tricks. How can I hate her? Just looking at her makes me feel warm and comfortable. Lin Shuyi is not bad. It's just that I've seen too many geniuses like him. I'm not interested. Kui Dong squinted his eyes and smiled. Yu Lu dislikes Li Huai the most because he hates that kind of muddling along and waiting for death. How can there be such a lazy person in the world? Of course, there's also his sloppiness and lack of cleanliness. You like Lin Shuyi the most because you subconsciously think of yourself as the crown prince of the Lu dynasty. For a country to prosper, it needs Lin Shuyi to be a positive pillar of support. Although Xie seems to be very familiar with Lin Shuyi and often plays chess with him, he is actually going crazy with jealousy. They are both geniuses in cultivation. Why is it that Lin Shui's life is so smooth, but he has to suffer such a calamity? It's very likely that he will be blocked by the great Tao and have no hope of immortality. Yu Lu was silent. Xie Xie's expression was extremely ugly. Kui Dong laughed. Then why don't we like Chen Pinggan? But why did Li Baoping and the other two fledgling kids like Chen Pinggan the most, contrary to us, who are all mature foxes, like us the most? Isn't he very chewy? Yu Lu, Xie Xie. Whoever can give me the correct answer in my heart, I will give you a good thing that you can use. Xie Xie slowly said, because the three of them are used to looking at Chen Pinggan whenever they encounter difficulties and choices. They feel that Chen Pinggan does things the most justly and is willing to pay the price. And Chen Pinggan, to the three of us, aside from Lord Imperial Tutor's personal desires, this kind of seemingly easy to get along with and willing to be kind to others is really not worth mentioning. Yu Lu shook his head. Chen Pinggan is not that easy to get along with. Kui Dong clicked his tongue. The two of you are about the same. You are so stupid that it's cute. Why don't I just let the two of you get married? A talented man and a beautiful woman. Oh, no, temporarily a talented woman and a handsome man. How about it? Yu Lu and Xie Xie did not reply, because they both knew that this was a joke. Kui Dong stroked a jade pendant on his waist with 2 fingers. You don't know that Chen Pinggan is like a mirror. He will let the people around him see their own shortcomings more clearly than usual. So if you get along with him day and night, as long as you have problems with your state of mind, you will have problems. Once upon a time, there was a foolish girl named Zhu Lu who was forced to a dead end. She was stupid because she was stupid and did not know it. She did bad things, but her heart was still muddled. This is called stupid and bad. She is also a woman, but compared to our Dali Empress, she is far inferior. Our Empress, the cleverest thing about her was, do you think I don't know what bad things I have done? Back then, it was this unintentional sentence that made me decide to cooperate with her. Kui Dong pointed to himself. According to a hidden saying of a certain Daoist master, everyone has 2 heartstrings, one good and one evil, hanging in our hearts. Just like what Chen Pinggan believes, some things are right, and some things are wrong. No matter who does it or who helps to explain it, it will not change anything. What is interesting is that the difficulties of the world lie in the fact that in order to do a good thing, you will inevitably do many small mistakes. Confucian disciples are unwilling to go against their hearts. They may not even be able to stay in the officialdom, and may not even be able to climb high in the learning palace. In the end, they can only hide in the study room to study and build a cart behind closed doors. To the outside world, they are of little benefit. Some people have stayed in the study room for a long time and are pedantic and stale. They can't bear to see any moral flaws in others, and they often criticize and belittle them. Instead, they are helpless against those who are thoroughly bad in the imperial court. In the end, they can only degrade day by day and the collapse of etiquette and music. Kui Dong did not look at the 2 guys who were deep in thought. He stretched out one palm and wiped in front of him, then changed to another palm and wiped in a lower place. The top is good and the bottom is evil. The human heart has 2 strings. I, Kui Dong, am good, almost as high as the sky, so I don't see many good people in my eyes. I, Kui Dong, am evil, so to me, I can associate with and use them without any psychological burden. The 2 of you are not as different as me, but the distance between the 2 strings is not small. Kui Dong put away his left hand and left a small gap between the thumb and index finger of his right hand. He lowered his head and squinted at the 2 fingers. Chen Pinggan's good is very low, so to him, doing good things is a natural thing. This is the reason why he is regarded as a good person. But you have to know that a low good does not mean that he is really easy to talk to. Because Chen Pinggan's evil is very close to his good, so when he decides to do something, Chen Pinggan will be extremely decisive, such as, killing me. In fact, the 2 of you know very well that no matter how much you look down on Chen Pinggan, you, and of course, me, will never be Chen Pinggan's friend in this lifetime. Yu Lu suddenly said, I can try. Xie Xie's mouth curved into a cold smile. However, when she caught a glimpse of Yu Lu from the corner of her eyes, she thought of how she was forced by Kuisha to look for Chen Pinggan and explain the martial arts to him in Hungshan. Under the threat of Kuisha, she had no choice but to take the initiative to look for Chen Pinggan. The girl was a little flustered. Then, she thought of the thin figure standing on the branch, facing the wind, the gentle breeze in the mountain. She suddenly felt an inexplicable sadness. She had also had a pure state of mind like this, always looking into the distance. I've said so much and wasted a big jar of saliva. What exactly am I trying to say? Kui Dong began to make a conclusion. He stood up and said with a smile, what I'm trying to say is, in the future, you two idiots should respect me, Kui Dong's husband, from the bottom of your heart. Do you understand? This was the second time today that Yu Lu and Xie Xie looked at each other. Two ungrateful, pitiful bastards who don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Kui Dong flew into a rage for no reason. His face was gloomy as he strode forward and punched Yu Lu in the face. A broken crown prince who has become a criminal and almost has to have words carved on his face. Do you know how many emperors and princes I, Dali, have killed? You still want to try? Do you, a bastard who has betrayed your ancestors, have the qualifications to do so? Yu Lu was caught off guard and took the punch. He didn't dare to make any movements to fight back. He was just a little stunned. Kuisha turned around and walked towards the dark-skinned girl, slapping her across the face. You're just a little girl whose mountain gate has been smashed. Z, do you know how many land immortals I've killed with my own hands? The proud girl subconsciously reached out and grabbed the wrist of the young man in white to prevent him from slapping her face. However, she regretted it the next moment. As expected, Kui Dong emitted a terrifying and ferocious aura as he stared at the girl. She was so frightened that she immediately let go of her hand. Kui Dong lowered his head and looked at his red and swollen wrist. He slapped the girl's face fiercely and said sternly, "The two of you dare to look down on Chen Pinggan? He's my, Kui Dong's, husband." Kui Dong slapped the girl's face 4 to 5 times consecutively. The girl didn't even dare to use her Qi refinement warrior cultivation to dissipate the force. Soon, her face was red and swollen and blood seeped out from the corner of her mouth. Kui Dong, who was full of murderous aura, didn't seem to be satisfied. He wanted to find something to use as a weapon. At this moment, he turned around and saw a familiar figure running towards him. Kui Dong was stunned on the spot. The uninvited guest just shouted a word, "Eat." In the end, when he saw the scene of Kui Dong hitting someone, the guy quickly swallowed the word food and started to run wildly towards Kui Dong. The aura of the young man was more like a murderous aura. Kui Dong was so frightened that he didn't say anything. He crawled and rolled over the pavilion's railing and ran towards the old well. As he shouted, he turned his head and shouted, "Chen Pinggan, what are you doing?" "I'm teaching my own servant a lesson." "It's none of your business." "Sai, let's talk nicely. I'll admit my mistake, okay? Let's all stop and reason things out, okay?" After Chen Pinggan ran into the pavilion, he tipped his toes and jumped up high. His body flew over the railing like a bird and landed outside the pavilion. He continued to run towards Kui Dong. Kui Dong knew that he wouldn't be able to escape, so he decided to throw caution to the wind. He stood at the mouth of the old well and sorrowfully said in a trembling voice, "Chen Pinggan, if you really want to kill me today, I'll just jump into the well and commit suicide. It's up to you to believe it or not." Chen Pinggan continued to rush forward. Kui Dong was about to jump into the well when Chen Pinggan frowned and suddenly stopped. Kui Dong took a step forward. At the critical moment, he pulled his foot back with great difficulty. His body swayed and his life was hanging by a thread. With his current physique, even if he didn't freeze to death or drown after falling to the bottom of the well, because there were still remnants of sword chi below, he would most likely be severely injured and lose half of his life if Chen Pinggan saved him. From this, it could be seen that the young Kui Dong was really afraid of Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan looked at Kui Dong carefully. After a long time, he said, "Let's eat." Kui Dong carefully jumped into the well. He still didn't dare to go forward. He stood where he was and explained with grief and indignation, "I was just standing up for you. The two of them looked down on you from the bottom of their hearts. I stood up for them and asked them to be more polite to you in the future. Is that wrong? You're treating my good intentions as ill intent. Chen Pinggan sneered. Don't use me as an excuse. You're just a dog that can't change its habit of eating shit. After that, Chen Pinggan turned around and left. When he bypassed the pavilion, he spoke to the young boy and girl in a much gentler tone. Lin Shuyi and the others have finished a game of chess and are eating. Kui Dong didn't get angry. Instead, he smiled and followed Chen Pinggan from afar. He ran and swayed, his two big sleeves fluttering in the wind. He looked like a lackey. You're indeed my master. You're much smarter than those two idiots. After passing the pavilion, Kui Dong faced the two people. He immediately changed his expression and reprimanded. What are you standing there for? Let's eat. Yu Lu smiled as usual and walked out of the pavilion. After walking down the steps, he turned around and asked, Are you okay? She shook her head with tears in her eyes. The tall young boy pointed to the corner of his mouth. After the girl came back to her senses, she turned her head and wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth. The group ate the sumptuous breakfast prepared by the Autumn Read Inn. Li Huai ate until his stomach was round. This heartless little brat was completely unaware of the strange atmosphere at the table. The old elementary scholar smiled at Chen Pinggan. Let's go. I'll take you to the bookstores in this county city. Let's chat casually. If possible, you can treat me to a drink. The old elementary scholar looked at the eager little girl and smiled. Together? The little girl nodded vigorously. I'll go back and carry my small bag. Lin Shuyi stayed at the inn and continued to practice breathing using the secret technique recorded in the Cloud Gem book. Li Huai was too lazy to move. He didn't have the desire to go shopping. He only told Chen Pinggan to bring back delicious food for him. Kui Dong said that he had some private matters and needed to find the inn owner to see if he could lower the price. Yu Lu and Xie Xie returned to their rooms. In the end, only the three of them left the Autumn Read Inn. They walked through the flowing clouds and flowing water alley and were led by the old elementary scholar to find a bookstore. The little girl kept showing off her bag to the old elementary scholar. She ran in circles around the old elementary scholar and asked if her bag looked good. Of course, the old elementary scholar said that it was good. Chen Pinggan pondered for a long time. Finally, he couldn't help but ask, Master Wensheng, are you angry with me? The old elementary scholar praised Li Baoping's small bag like a flower. After hearing the question, he laughed. Are you talking about the matter of refusing to be my closed-door disciple? No, I'm not angry. I'm a little disappointed. But thinking about it, this is actually good. Qi Jingquan's original intention and alliances following are not necessary to give Chen Pinggan anything. Also, last time I secretly took your jade hairpin. In the end. At this point, the old elementary scholar made a sweeping gesture with his palm. It's to let you know that Chen Pinggan is just Chen Pinggan. There's not much involvement. You're the young man from the Mud Bottle Alley in Liju Grotto Heaven. Your surname is Chen and your name is Ping'an. Then, you took Li Baoping and the others to travel far away to study. It's that simple. The old elementary scholar laughed. Alliance, this sloppy and lazy guy, it's rare for him to be serious for once. He helped you to prevent the Dali dynasty from bringing additional burdens to you and the children. Previously, Qi Jingquan had already made the higher-ups, not to criticize you. Because of my arrival, your good-tempered immortal sister has to show up, so there's a little trouble. But don't be afraid, an old man like me still has the ability. I won't cause you any trouble. I'm good at reasoning with scholars. The old elementary scholar patted the young man's shoulder. In the future, just focus on your studies. The old elementary scholar then said with a smile, a young man's shoulder should be like this. Don't be anxious about the hatred of the country or the righteousness. First, stir up the breeze and the moon, the willows and the grass and the orioles. A young man's shoulder should be full of beautiful things. Li Baoping's eyes lit up. She gave the old elementary scholar a thumbs up and praised, Master Scholar, what you said is very beautiful. The old elementary scholar laughed and patted his stomach. Of course, I'm full of knowledge. Chen Pingan looked at the old elementary scholar and the little girl who were teasing each other. He took a deep breath. The young man couldn't feel what was on his shoulder, but his heart was already warm. "157. In the eyes of the carefree little girl, this bustling county in the north of Huangting country was bustling with noise and excitement. Many small towns added together could not compare to it. However, in the eyes of an old scholar who had seen the world, of course, he would see further and more illusory. He might have already seen the gloomy scene of the iron cavalry marching south and the smoke rising everywhere. The bustling laughter would become the source of the heart-wrenching pain in the future. On the contrary, the shabbily dressed child beggars on the roadside would suffer less pain and suffering in the future. As for those ruffians and hooligans, they were more likely to leap up in the chaotic world and perhaps even become the new officials of the Huangting kingdom or the generals of the army. But the old Xiaozai had experienced the vicissitudes of life and naturally would not show such emotions on his face. He did not want to spoil the good mood of the young boy and the little girl. The old Xiaozai led them through many twists and turns until they found an old bookstore. He took out his own money to buy a few books for the two. The old man in the store was an old scholar who failed in the imperial examinations. Usually, he did not take anyone seriously. But when he met a poor old Xiaozai who was eloquent, he could be considered a hero. Plus, he was impressed by the old Xiaozai's knowledge and morals. The 20 taels of silver for the books were worth 10 taels of silver. After the old Xiaozai left the store, he looked at the admiring faces of Chen Pingan and Li Baoping and laughed. "How is it? Studying is still useful, right? Today you helped us earn 8 taels of silver. So, there is a house of gold in the books." At this point, the old scholar lowered his voice and said mysteriously, "You don't say, there's a place in the south. Of course, it's not the south of your Aquarius continent. It's called the Mellow Scholar Chen clan. There's an old fogey that I can't get along with. When he was young, he would study every day and night. About a few decades later, probably due to his sincerity, one day he really read a book and found a house of gold and a beautiful woman." Chen Pingan widened his eyes and swallowed his saliva. "That house of gold, how big is it?" Li Baoping curiously asked. "That Yang Ruyu, how beautiful is she?" The old scholar laughed and pointed at the two children. "If you have the chance in the future, go and see for yourself. I won't tell you. Seeing is believing. Good mountains, good rivers, and good scenery. There are descriptions in books, but it can't compare to seeing it in person." Li Baoping suddenly asked, "Mr. Wensheng, why did you buy those books for my youngest martial uncle? They are really shallow. Even Lin Shuyi and I can teach them. Isn't it a waste of money?" The old scholar stopped smiling and said seriously, "It's different, very different. The most knowledgeable books in the world must be the most profound and the most suitable for educating the common people. Do you know that these books are the cheapest? For example, the Tao Ancestors Book of 5,000 Wen is sold so cheaply. Anyone who wants to read it can buy it. Anyone who is willing to read it can learn something from it." Li Baoping said innocently, "There's a lot of printing and a lot of people buying them, so it's cheaper." The old scholar nodded and laughed. "You're half right. If it's too expensive, who would be willing to buy it? Why don't you go and buy some food? You can fill your stomach." The remaining half were those high and mighty moral sages. If they wanted to spread their knowledge more widely and become the orthodox knowledge of a province, a country, or even a continent, or even the entire world, how many disciples could they personally pass on their knowledge to? It's better to cast a wide net and imprint their knowledge and principles in books. The threshold is low, and more people walk in. If the threshold is too high, they can't even climb over it. In the end, how many disciples can they be proud of? Chen Pingan sighed softly. The old scholar asked worriedly, "What's wrong? You think it's boring? That won't do. You still have to read the books." Chen Pingan shook his head and said, "I just feel that it's like a commoner opening a shop to snatch business. In my hometown, at the Dragon Riding Alley, I have 2 friends who help to look after the shop. I don't know if it's a loss or a gain." The old scholar seemed to have thought of Sesame Chen's past and sighed. He waved his hand and said, Let's go, I'll take you to drink. Chen Pinggan, if you really want to drink, you can drink a little. Baoping is still too young to drink. It was still early and many restaurants had not opened for business. Fortunately, the old scholar found a wine shop at the corner of a street. It was dirty and greasy. Fortunately, the three of them did not care about this. If Kui Dong, Yu Luxi, and Xie were here, they would probably frown. One had high standards, one was a clean freak, and one had been pampered since childhood. They would probably never drink in this kind of place in their lifetime. The old man ordered a catty of loose wine and a plate of salted peanuts. Chen Pinggan still insisted that those who practiced martial arts were not allowed to drink. Li Baoping actually wanted to drink a little, but with her martial uncle by her side, she did not dare to make such a request. She could only stare at the old scholar with envy as he drank. After spending so much time with Chen Pinggan, from Li Baoping to Lin Shuyi and Li Huai, she had been influenced by what she saw and heard along the way. She was well aware of what could and could not be done. Li Baoping sometimes felt that her martial uncle was too strict. However, looking at the beautiful little box and the thick and soft straw sandals, she did not say anything more. Because Lin Shuyi had become an immortal on the mountain, he had high aspirations. It was not that he did not have any thoughts about Chen Pinggan, but from a higher point of view, he felt that these trivial matters were not worth his attention. Therefore, he never said anything. As for Li Huai, he was the most willing to speak his mind. Unfortunately, most of the time, he was unreasonable. Before Chen Pinggan could say anything, Li Baoping had already suppressed him severely. Therefore, throughout their journey of learning, there had never been any irreconcilable differences and they had maintained a delicate balance. After Zhu He and Zhu Lu left, outside Yefu Pass, Kui Dong brought 2 people to barge into the group. This made the previous 4 people even more united against a common enemy, and their relationship became even closer. The old Xiaozai drank. After drinking only half a liter of wine, he felt a little tipsy. Perhaps it was because he was reminded of the past and did not deliberately use his supernatural powers. It was rare for him to be so relaxed, so he let himself drink to drown his sorrows. The old man looked around and said softly, "I have a friend that I have known since I was young. His family was poor, so he dropped out of school. Later on, he opened a wine shop that was about the size of this shop. From the time he was 18, he married and had children, until he died of old age at 65. He had been running the wine shop for almost 40 years and had sold wine for almost 40 years. The old Xiaozai gently shook the wine bowl. As long as I had some spare money in my pocket, as long as I wanted to drink, I liked to buy wine from him. No matter how far away it was, I would definitely go there." The old Xiaozai smiled, a little sad. But one day, the shop closed. I asked the neighbors and found out that my friend had died. Since the original shop had closed, I had to go elsewhere to buy wine. That was when I found out that the kind of wine he sold me was more expensive than others. Li Baoping said angrily, "Master Wensheng, you treat him as a friend, but he doesn't seem to treat you as a friend." Chen Pinggan didn't say anything. The old man drank a mouthful of wine. But many years later, I found out that the wine he sold me was brewed from the herbs he personally picked in the mountains. He didn't care about the cost, he used the best ingredients. He sold it at a loss. Li Baoping opened her mouth wide. The little girl's heart was suddenly filled with guilt. The old man picked up a peanut and put it in his mouth to chew. In the past 40 years, I went from a shabby scholar to an Xiaozai scholar. After that, I also had some ability and fame. Every time that friend saw me, he would only persuade me to drink. He never mentioned anything about his children's studies or the turmoil in his wife's family. All he did was persuade me to drink. Every time, he would sit in your seat, opposite me. His seat was the furthest away from me, but when he raised his head, he could see me. Every time, he would smile foolishly. Li Baoping thought for a moment and quietly left her seat. She sat opposite Chen Pinggan and grinned. Chen Pinggan made a face at her. The old Xiaozai slowly said, "Later on, I found out that his children either became the local officials of the imperial court and were domineering and domineering. They brought disaster to the country and the people. At a young age, they became titled madams and often beat or killed their concubines and maids. His wife's family suddenly became rich and became a big family. The whole family was very bad. They did all kinds of bad things and harmed many innocent people. The old Shotsai stared blankly at the empty seat opposite him. But you insisted on staying in that small wine shop, in a shabby shop, and brewing wine year after year until you died of old age. Li Baoping opened her mouth wide again. Her face was full of disbelief. The old Shotsai retracted his gaze and ate salted peanuts with his wine. He said to Chen Pinggan, "In the future, practice martial arts and swordsmanship well. Don't be reasonable about everything, especially don't follow the principles in the books. You have to be flexible. Otherwise, you will be very tired. Maybe in the end, you will be the only one by your side and not have half a friend." Since ancient times, the higher the position of the sage, the more unreasonable things they have done, isn't it? The old Shotsai stretched out his finger and drew a line on the table. Finally, he straightened his arm, as if he wanted to draw a path beyond the table. Think about it. Some roads, you can walk alone for a year. But what about 10 years? 100 or 1,000 years? But here comes the problem. Some people are stubborn and insist on walking down the road. What can you do? You have to do the right thing at the right time. Don't be too old. If you have experienced everything, you won't feel regret when you walk down the road alone. Instead, you will feel. The old Shotsai was really drunk. He stretched out his thumb and pointed at himself. I am really King awesome. After saying these heroic words, the old Shotsai's head fell forward with a bang and hit the table heavily. The young man paid the bill with the shopkeeper and walked out with the old Shotsai on his back. The little girl was secretly happy. It turned out that the sage of literature could get drunk and talk a lot when drunk. Chen Pinggan, it's a waste of youth if you don't have a romantic life. You must drink. Drinking is good. Little Baoping, remember this. You have to cherish Chen Pinggan. Don't think that he's unreasonable just because he's doing too well. Instead, you'll distance yourself from him. Otherwise, you'll regret it one day. Chen Pinggan will become the second Xiao Qi. When something happens, no one will know about it, or even if they know, they won't have the guts to help. How miserable would that be? Little Pinggan, we're being reasonable, not to make ourselves feel wronged, but to slowly accumulate it. If there comes a day when you suddenly feel that the whole world is unreasonable, you have the confidence and spirit to loudly tell the world, you're all wrong. The old Shotsai smelled of alcohol and patted the young man's head. Chen Pinggan, who was carrying the old Shotsai on his back, had a bitter face and could only nod desperately. The old Shotsai burped and straightened his neck, as if he was looking for the little girl in the green bamboo box. Li Baoping quickly jumped up. I'm here. The old Shotsai made 2 sounds and then slapped Chen Pinggan's head again. Little Pinggan, let me ask you. The more you read in the future, the more you feel that the principles in the books are reasonable. But if one day, the whole, or half of the scholars in the world start to criticize little Baoping and say that she is shameless for liking her junior uncle, what will you do? The little girl didn't take it seriously and said angrily, is it wrong for me to like junior uncle? How can these people read? The young man had been living at the bottom of the city since he was young, and it was difficult for him to survive. Therefore, Chen Pinggan had to think further and no more dirty things. He said without hesitation, if there really comes a day when they want to scold Baoping, they will have to ask my fist first. Chen Pinggan turned to the little girl and said with a smile, other than fist, junior uncle will also have a sword in the future. So if that day really comes, you must tell junior uncle. Even if junior uncle is far away, he will come to protect you. The old Shotsai said drunkenly, then if the little girl thinks that you can't beat those people and is afraid that you will get hurt, she deliberately doesn't call you. Chen Pinggan, you only know the pitiful ending after the incident. What will you do? Now that things have come to this, do you want to catch those scholars and kill them? Chen Pinggan stopped and looked at the little girl. Baoping, do you want junior uncle to kill for you and be scolded and beaten to death? Or do you want to confront those bad guys openly and face them together? Even if we die, We will die righteously and not have any regrets. The little girl was a little flustered. Junior uncle, it sounds like the latter option is slightly better. The old Shotsai laughed. It's not as miserable as you think. Scholars still have some shame. It's not to the point of life and death, it's just a little bumpy. The old Shotsai finally said, speaking of the order, this kid used it so quickly. Applying what he has learned. Impressive. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, Sir, it's okay if you scare us, but don't you think it's a little too much to pretend to be drunk to not pay? The old Shotsai's head tilted and he snored like thunder. Li Baoping still had some lingering fear, so she grabbed Chen Pinggan's sleeve. Chen Pinggan joked, what are you afraid of? In the future, you just have to study hard and try to win against them in terms of reasoning. If this still doesn't work, Junior uncle will work harder from today on to practice martial arts and swordsmanship. When the time comes, Junior uncle will fly on his sword and come to your side from thousands of miles away. Think about it, everyone will look up and stare at your junior uncle with their eyes wide open, just like when we saw Wei Jin in the Wind Snow Temple. At that time, you can tell everyone that this is your junior uncle. Isn't he awesome? The little girl nodded vigorously and laughed heartily. She jumped up and said, wow, cool, cool. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.